I'm Marcus Williams, 34, a construction foreman who never thought he'd be fighting for his kids in family court. When my ex-wife Jessica called me selfish for wanting primary custody of our 7-year-old twins, Emma and Jake, her words cut deeper than any saw blade I'd ever handled. "You're just trying to hurt me," she screamed across the courthouse steps, her designer heels clicking against the concrete as photographers snapped pictures for her social media empire. But Jessica didn't see what I saw every weekend when the kids came to my cramped 2-bedroom apartment. She didn't notice how Emma's anxiety attacks had stopped, or how Jake finally started sleeping through the night without nightmares. She was too busy building her online brand as the struggling single mom to realize her children were drowning. What happened next would force her to confront a truth she'd been running from for years. If you've ever fought for what matters most, subscribe for stories of courage and transformation. It started with Emma's empty pill bottle. I found it 3 months ago, tucked behind a stack of Jessica's fashion magazines on her kitchen counter. Fluoxetine, my 7-year-old daughter's anxiety medication, prescribed after her panic attacks, had gotten so severe she couldn't sleep through the night. The bottle should have been half full. Instead, it rattled with maybe 3 pills left. "When did you last give Emma her medicine?" I asked Jessica, holding up the orange plastic container. She barely looked up from her phone, where she was editing another Instagram post about her authentic single mom journey. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nothing about Jessica's carefully curated life was authentic. "Oh, that," she waved dismissively. "Emma said she didn't need it anymore. She's been fine." Fine. That word echoed in my head as I watched my daughter, sitting in the corner of Jessica's pristine white living room, her small body rigid with tension, eyes darting toward the door every few minutes. Emma hadn't been fine in months. She'd been surviving. The night that changed everything was Jessica's housewarming party. She'd moved into a luxury townhouse in Riverside Heights paid for by her father. Though she told her followers she'd worked so hard to achieve this dream, the place was stunning. Marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Perfect for her lifestyle brand, terrible for 2 young children who needed stability and attention. Emma and Jake were supposed to be the adorable backdrop for Jessica's evening. She'd dressed them in matching designer outfits, their hair styled perfectly for the inevitable photos. But as the night wore on, and Jessica's wine consumption increased, the children became invisible to her. I watched from across the room as Emma's breathing became shallow and rapid. Her little hands were clenched into fists, and she kept hugging at the collar of her dress, a telltale sign that anxiety was taking hold. Jake, meanwhile, had found a quiet corner behind the couch, retreating into himself the way he always did when overwhelmed. "Emma, sweetheart." I knelt beside her, keeping my voice calm and low. "How are you feeling?" "My chest hurts, Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the party chatter. "And I can't breathe right." I knew that feeling. I'd watched her struggle with it too many times, especially during the weeks she spent at Jessica's house. The panic attacks had started shortly after our divorce was finalized, when the custody arrangement forced Emma and Jake to split their time between 2 very different worlds. "Let's go outside and get some fresh air," I suggested. But before I could help her up, Jessica appeared. "Emma, honey, come here." Jessica's voice carried that artificially sweet tone she used when others were watching. "I want to get a picture of you and Jake with Mommy. She's having trouble breathing," I said quietly. "She's fine, Marcus," Jessica interrupted, her smile never wavering, even as her eyes flashed with irritation. "You're being dramatic. Emma, come on." But Emma wasn't fine. As Jessica pulled her toward a group of admirers waiting to snap photos, my daughter's breathing became even more labored. Her face had gone pale, and I could see the familiar signs of a full panic attack taking hold. "I need air," Emma gasped, breaking away from her mother's grip. That's when Jake started crying, not the normal tears of a tired child, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who'd been holding in too much for too long. The perfectly orchestrated party atmosphere cracked, revealing the dysfunction underneath. "What's wrong with them?" one of Jessica's friends asked, her tone suggesting the children were defective products rather than human beings in distress. "They're just tired." Jessica laughed, but I could see the panic in her own eyes now. This wasn't fitting her narrative. I scooped Emma into my arms and reached for Jake's hand. "We're leaving," I announced. "You can't just take them," Jessica protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Deep down, she knew something was wrong too. "Watch me," I said, and for the first time since our divorce, I saw fear replace the arrogance in Jessica's eyes. That night, I held both children in my small apartment as they finally felt safe enough to tell me the truth. Emma admitted she'd been hiding her anxiety attacks from her mother because Jessica got angry and sad when she needed her medicine. Jake confessed that he wet the bed at Jessica's house but was too scared to tell her because she'd gotten so upset the last time, as I tucked them into their beds. The same twin beds I'd bought secondhand, but they loved because we'd painted them. Together I made a decision that would change all our lives. I was going to fight for them, really fight. Not just for weekends and holidays, but for the chance to give them the stable, loving home they deserved every single day. The empty pill bottle sat on my kitchen counter for weeks afterward, a constant reminder of what was at stake. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about saving my children before it was too late. Jessica's engagement ring still catches the light when she gestures, a 3-carat reminder of the world I never quite belonged to. Even now, years after our divorce, she wears it on her right hand, a symbol of the life she thinks she deserves, rather than the one she's living. I remember the day I proposed, how out of place I felt in that expensive restaurant her father had recommended. The ring had cost me 4 months' salary, every penny I'd saved working double shifts on construction sites. But Jessica's smile when she said yes made it worth every sleepless night and skipped meal. We met at a charity event, one of those fancy fundraisers where wealthy people gather to feel good about themselves while wearing $1,000 shoes. I was there because my company had donated materials for a Habitat for Humanity project, and the organizers wanted us to accept some recognition. Jessica was there because her family always attended, part of their social obligations. She was stunning, in a way that made my work-calloused hands suddenly feel like sandpaper. Golden hair, perfectly styled, a dress that probably cost more than my truck payment, and a laugh that drew people like moths to flame. When she approached me at the bar, I assumed she was lost or mistaken. "You're the construction guy, right?" she asked, and I braced myself for the dismissal I'd grown accustomed to in her social circle. "Foreman," I corrected, not sure why it mattered. "I love what you do," she said, and her interest seemed genuine. "Building things that last, creating homes for families. It's real work." That conversation lasted 3 hours. She told me about her frustration with the superficial world she'd grown up in, how she wanted something authentic, something meaningful. I told her about my dreams of expanding my construction business, maybe even starting a nonprofit to build affordable housing. She listened like my words were poetry. For 6 months, we lived in a bubble where our differences felt romantic instead of problematic. Jessica would visit job sites, charming my crew with her enthusiasm and genuine interest in their work. I'd attend gallery openings and charity dinners, proud to have her on my arm even when I couldn't follow the conversations about art, market trends, and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Her parents tolerated me at first, a phase their daughter was going through. They assumed Robert Caldwell, Jessica's father, made his fortune in real estate development, the kind that displaced working families to build luxury condos. Margaret, her mother, had never worked a day in her life, but somehow managed to stay busier than any person I'd ever met, flitting between charity committees and social engagements. The engagement party was my first real glimpse of the golden cage I was entering, held at the country club where Jessica had spent her summers as a child. It was a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and status. I wore the only suit I owned, a charcoal gray one I'd bought for my father's funeral years earlier. Jessica looked like a princess in ivory silk, radiant and perfect. "So, Marcus," Robert cornered me near the champagne fountain, "what are your plans for supporting my daughter and the lifestyle she's accustomed to?" The question hit me like a sledgehammer. Until that moment, I'd genuinely believed love would be enough. "I'm working on expanding my business," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Construction is booming, and I have some good contracts lined up." His laugh was polite but dismissive. "Construction work is admirable, son, but Jessica has certain expectations. Perhaps you should consider joining one of our development projects. We could use someone with your practical skills." That night, Jessica and I had our first real fight. She insisted her father was trying to help, that I was being too proud to accept a good opportunity. I saw it as charity, a way to keep me dependent and controllable. We made up eventually, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Our wedding was a fairy tale, at least. That's what the society page photographs suggested. 500 guests, a venue that costs more than most people's houses, and every detail managed by a team of professionals. Jessica was radiant, and I was grateful. But standing at the altar, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was signing a contract I hadn't fully read. The first year of marriage was a careful dance of compromise. Jessica tried to embrace my world, accompanying me to company barbecues and my crew's birthday parties. I learned to navigate her social calendar, attending fundraisers and dinner parties where I smiled and nodded while feeling like an actor in a play I didn't understand. When Emma was born, followed by Jake 18 months later, we both thought parenthood would bridge our different worlds. Jessica threw herself into motherhood with the same perfectionism she applied to everything else. Designer nurseries, organic baby food, and a schedule that would make a military commander proud. She documented every milestone, every adorable moment, creating a picture-perfect family narrative. But perfection is exhausting, and cracks began to show. Jessica's patience with the messy realities of parenting, sleepless nights, temper tantrums, the chaos of toddlers wore thin. She hired nannies to maintain her social commitments, then felt guilty about missing precious moments with the children. The guilt turned to resentment, and the resentment found its target in me. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," became her refrain. "Your life is so simple: go to work, come home, play with the kids. I have responsibilities." Those responsibilities seemed to multiply as our marriage deteriorated. More charity work, more social events, more reasons to be anywhere but home with her family. The children became props in her increasingly frantic attempts to prove she was living the perfect life. The ring on her finger grew heavier with each passing year, a golden shackle that bound her to expectations she couldn't meet, and a life that looked better in photographs than it felt in reality. But she couldn't take it off, not then, not now. It represented everything she'd been taught to want. Even as it slowly strangled the woman she might have been, I should have seen the signs earlier. The way she started checking her phone obsessively, documenting every moment of our lives for social media validation, the gradual shift from being present with the children to positioning them for photos, the increasing frequency of her girls' nights out and weekend charity, events that always seemed to need her immediate attention. By the time Emma started having nightmares and Jake began stuttering, Jessica was already living in a different world, one where image mattered more than substance, where the appearance of happiness was more important than the reality of our family's well-being. The golden cage had become a prison, and somehow, my children and I had become the prisoners. My construction hard hat sits on the kitchen counter of my apartment now, a reminder of the honest work that saved my sanity during those final months of marriage. The yellow plastic is scratched and faded, bearing the scars of countless job sites, but it represents something Jessica's world never understood: the dignity of building something real with your own hands. I started Williams Construction 5 years before I met Jessica, working 16-hour days to establish myself in a competitive market. By the time we married, I had a solid reputation and a crew of 8 reliable guys who'd become like family. But Jessica's social circle saw my work as something slightly embarrassing, a necessary evil that funded her lifestyle but wasn't quite refined enough for polite conversation. "Marcus builds things," she'd say at dinner parties, as if I were a particularly clever child who'd mastered Legos. The phrase always came with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a subtle signal that we shouldn't dwell on the topic. The country club crowd preferred discussions about stock portfolios and exotic vacations. When someone did ask about my work, their questions revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what I did. "Oh, like a contractor," they'd say, as if I hired other people to do the real work while I supervised from an air-conditioned trailer. I tried to explain the satisfaction of framing a house that would shelter a family for generations, the precision required to lay a foundation that would never shift, the artistry and custom millwork that would outlast us all. But their polite nods and quick subject changes told me everything. I needed to know about how they viewed my profession. The disconnect became painful when Jessica started suggesting I transition to something more suitable for her social standing. Her father offered me a position in his development company, a desk job with a title that sounded impressive but would have kept me away from the work I loved. "You could wear a suit to work," Jessica said, as if that were the ultimate goal. But I'd seen what happened to men who abandoned their calling for social acceptability. They became hollow versions of themselves, speaking in corporate jargon and losing the spark that made them who they were. My crew knew this too. Tommy, my lead carpenter, had worked construction for 20 years after his wife left him for a banker. "Never met a banker who could build a house," he'd say, "but I've met plenty who could tear one down." The children were my refuge during those increasingly tense years. Emma loved visiting job sites, her wide eyes taking in every detail. As I explained how walls went up and roofs came together, she'd wear a tiny hard hat I'd bought her, following me around like a shadow and asking endless questions about why we did things certain ways. Jake was more interested in the machinery, fascinated by the excavators and concrete mixers. He'd spend hours watching the crews work, his small hands mimicking the motions of the operators. Both children understood something their mother never did, that creating something with your hands was magical, not menial. But Jessica's attitude toward my work began affecting the children. I noticed Emma becoming self-conscious about talking about my job at her private school, where most fathers were lawyers or doctors or executives. Jake stopped asking if he could come to job sites, sensing his mother's disapproval. "Why can't Daddy have a different job?" Emma asked one day, her 7-year-old voice carrying the weight of social pressure she shouldn't have understood. That question broke something in me. My daughter was learning to be ashamed of honest work, to value appearance over substance. She was absorbing her mother's values without understanding their cost. The final straw came. During a dinner party at our house, Jessica had invited several couples from her social circle, including the Hendersons, whose pretentious commentary on everything from wine to politics made my teeth ache. Margaret Henderson, a woman who'd never worked outside the home but somehow felt qualified to judge everyone else's career choices, decided to enlighten the group about the construction industry. "It's such a shame how these trade workers have no real job security," she announced, her voice carrying across our dining room. "One economic downturn and they're all unemployed. No education to fall back on, no transferable skills." The room went quiet. Jessica's face flushed, but she didn't defend me. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about the Hendersons' recent trip to Europe. I excused myself. Walking out to the garage where my tools hung in neat rows on the pegboard, installed myself. These weren't just tools, they were extensions of my hands, instruments that had built schools and hospitals and homes. Each one had a story, a project where it had been essential. The house we were sitting in, the one Jessica was so proud of, existed because of these tools and the skills they represented, but my wife was ashamed of them. Ashamed of me. That night, after the guests had gone home and Jessica had retreated to her walk-in closet to plan her next social media post, I sat in the children's room watching them sleep. Emma clutched a small toy hammer I'd given her, while Jake had fallen asleep with a book about construction equipment. They still saw magic in what I did, but I could see that innocence slipping away. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her silk pajamas a stark contrast to my work clothes, which I still wore like armor. "We need to talk," she said, her voice carrying the tone she used when discussing household repairs or scheduling conflicts. "About what?" "About your attitude tonight. Margaret was just making conversation, and you acted like she'd insulted your entire family. She insulted my profession, my livelihood, the work that pays for this house and her precious dinner parties." "Don't be dramatic, Marcus. She has a point about job security. Maybe it's time to consider Dad's offer. Seriously." I looked at my sleeping children, then back at my wife. "I'm not ashamed of what I do, Jessica. I'm proud of it, and I want our kids to be proud of it too." "Of course you should be proud," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "But you also need to be practical. Think about what's best for our family." "I am thinking about our family. I'm thinking about raising children who understand that honest work has value, that building something with your hands is noble, not embarrassing." "Nobody said it was embarrassing. You didn't have to say it. Your silence said it all." That conversation echoed in my mind for weeks afterward. Jessica's inability to defend me, to stand up for the work that provided our comfortable lifestyle, revealed a fundamental divide in our values. She saw my profession as a stepping stone to something better, while I saw it as a destination worth reaching. The children noticed the growing tension. Emma's anxiety attacks began around this time, though we didn't recognize them as such initially. Jake's stuttering worsened, especially when Jessica was around. They were absorbing our conflict, feeling the instability in their foundation just as surely as a house built on shifting ground. My hard hat became a symbol of everything wrong with our marriage, my stubborn refusal to become someone else, Jessica's inability to accept who I was, and our children's confusion about what they were supposed to value. But it was also a symbol of what I wouldn't compromise. When everything else in our relationship crumbled, my commitment to honest work remained. Solid would be the foundation I'd build our new life on. Once I found the courage to accept that our marriage was beyond repair. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I signed for them in my work clothes, coffee still steaming on the kitchen counter, completely unprepared for the legal warfare that was about to consume my life. Jessica had filed first, a strategic move her lawyer had undoubtedly recommended. The petition painted me as an unstable provider, someone whose unpredictable income from manual labor made me unsuitable for primary custody. Reading those words, my life's work, reduced to manual labor, felt like a punch to the gut. Demands were staggering. Jessica wanted the house, primary custody of the children, an alimony that would cripple my ability to maintain even a modest apartment. Her lawyer had clearly done his homework, positioning her as the devoted mother who'd sacrificed her own career to raise our children, while I was portrayed as the absent father who prioritized work over family. There was some truth to that characterization, which made it sting even more. I had worked long hours, especially during the busy season. I had missed some school events and bedtime stories, but I'd done it to provide for them, to build something stable and lasting. Jessica's version of events conveniently omitted the weekends I'd spent building the children's playhouse, the mornings I'd made breakfast before she woke up, the nights I'd walked the floors with sick babies while she slept. I couldn't afford the kind of lawyer Jessica's father had hired a shark in an expensive suit who specialized in high-asset divorces. My attorney, Jim Morrison, was a decent man who'd handled my business contracts and real estate deals, but family law wasn't his specialty. He was honest about our disadvantages from the start. "Marcus, I've got to be straight with you," Jim said during our first meeting, reviewing Jessica's petition with the expression of a man examining a particularly aggressive cancer diagnosis. "They're playing hardball here. Her father's connections, her family's reputation, the fact that she's been the primary caregiver while you've been working it all favors her position." "But I'm a good father," I protested, feeling the inadequacy of those words even as I spoke them. "I know you are, but the system tends to favor mothers, especially when there's a significant disparity in resources. Her lawyer is Harold Steinberg, got a reputation for destroying fathers in custody cases." The temporary custody arrangement felt like a knife to the heart. I would get the children every other weekend and one evening per week, supervised initially because Jessica's lawyer had raised concerns about my emotional stability following the separation. The supervised visits took place in a sterile office building, where a court-appointed monitor watched every interaction like I was a potential threat to my own children. Emma cried during our first supervised visit, not understanding why we couldn't go home to my apartment, why a stranger was watching us play with donated toys in a room that smelled like industrial disinfectant. Jake just stared at his shoes, overwhelmed by the institutional atmosphere. "Why can't we go to your house, Daddy?" Emma asked, her small voice breaking. "We will soon, sweetheart," I promised, though I had no idea if that was true. "This is just temporary." The monitor, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson, took notes about our conversation. Everything was evidence now. Every hug, every shared joke, every moment of connection between a father and his children had to be documented and evaluated by strangers. Jessica's strategy became clear over the following weeks. She was documenting everything too, but from a different angle. Photos of the children's expensive clothes and private school activities appeared on her social media, accompanied by captions about being a single mom, working hard to provide stability. She hired a photographer to capture candid moments of her helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, preparing organic meals. The narrative she was building was powerful. Devoted mother struggling to maintain her children's lifestyle while their father fought to reduce his financial obligations. Her followers ate it up, offering support and sympathy for her plight. Comments poured in about deadbeat dads and the challenges of single motherhood. Despite the fact that I was paying temporary support that left me barely able to afford rent, my own documentation efforts felt pathetic by comparison. I took photos of the children's artwork on my refrigerator, wrote down conversations we'd had, kept receipts for every expense related to their care, but I couldn't compete with Jessica's polished presentation or her family's resources. The financial discovery process was humiliating. Every aspect of my business finances was scrutinized, from tax returns to bank statements to client contracts. Steinberg's team portrayed my construction company as unstable, pointing to the seasonal nature of the work and the gaps between major projects. They conveniently ignored the fact that I'd been profitable for 8 consecutive years, and had never missed a payment on any obligation. Meanwhile, Jessica's finances remained largely protected. Her family's money was held in trusts and corporate structures that shielded it from the divorce proceedings. She claimed minimal income despite living in a lifestyle that cost more than I made in a year. The mediation sessions were exercises in frustration. Jessica's lawyer would make outrageous demands, then present modest concessions as generous compromises. They wanted me to agree to a custody schedule that would essentially make me a weekend visitor in my children's lives, while paying enough support to maintain Jessica's standard of living. "Mr. Williams needs to understand that his children deserve consistency," Steinberg argued during one particularly contentious session. "They've grown accustomed to certain advantages: private school, extracurricular activities, cultural enrichment. His desire to disrupt their stability for his own convenience is frankly selfish." Selfish. There was that word again, the one that would haunt me through the entire process. Wanting to be a full-time father was selfish. Expecting my children to respect honest work was selfish. Refusing to bankrupt myself to fund Jessica's lifestyle was selfish. But I began to understand that this wasn't really about money or custody schedules, it was about control. Jessica's family had always seen me as a temporary inconvenience, someone who could be managed or eliminated when he became problematic. The divorce was their opportunity to put me back in my place permanently. As the proceedings dragged on, I watched my children during our brief visits, seeing changes that broke my heart. Emma's anxiety was getting worse, though Jessica attributed it to the stress of the divorce rather than examining her own role. Jake had started wetting the bed again, a regression that the child psychologist Jessica had hired blamed on my disruptive influence. The divorce decree, when it finally came, was a mixed victory at best. I'd avoided the most crushing financial demands, but the custody arrangement was exactly what Jessica had wanted. Primary custody with me relegated to every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. The support payments would stretch my budget to the breaking point, but I'd be able to maintain a modest apartment where the children could stay. More importantly, the decree included a provision for reviewing the custody arrangement if circumstances changed significantly. Jim had fought for that clause, recognizing that our initial disadvantage might not be permanent. "This isn't the end, Marcus," he told me as we reviewed the final papers. "It's just the beginning. Document everything. Be the best father you can be during your time with them, and keep your business growing. Courts can modify custody arrangements when it's in the children's best interest." I signed the papers with a mixture of relief and determination. The legal battle was over, but the real fight, the one for my children's well-being, was just beginning. The decree represented the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I was no longer a husband, but I was still a father. And despite everything Jessica's lawyer had claimed, I wasn't going to be a weekend visitor in my children's lives. I was going to be their dad, fully and completely, even if I only had them part-time. The paper itself was just a legal document, but it became a symbol of everything I was fighting for: the right to be a real parent, to provide love and stability, to show my children that their father would never give up on them, no matter what obstacles were placed in his path. The art supplies I bought for Emma sit in a small plastic bin beside her bed in my apartment: 6x4 crayons, colored pencils, markers, and a stack of drawing paper that she goes through like a woman possessed. Those supplies represent something Jessica's money could never buy: the freedom to create without worrying about making a mess, the space to express feelings that 7-year-old words couldn't capture. My apartment is nothing like the house Jessica and I shared. It's a modest two-bedroom, in a working-class neighborhood, with thin walls and a view of the parking lot, but it's ours, mine and the children's during those precious weekends when the court allows me to be a full-time father. The first few visits were heartbreaking. Emma and Jake would arrive on Friday evening like refugees from a war zone, their little suitcases packed with enough clothes for a month, their faces carrying the careful neutrality of children who'd learned not to show too much emotion. They'd inspect every corner of the apartment, reacquainting themselves with this strange other world where their father lived. "Where's your TV?" Jake asked during that first weekend, looking around the living room with confusion. "I don't have cable," I admitted, watching his face fall. "But I have something better." I pulled out a deck of cards, some board games I'd bought at a thrift store, and a collection of books I'd been reading to them since they were babies. Emma's eyes lit up at the sight of Where the Wild Things Are, while Jake gravitated toward the game of Monopoly. "Mommy says board games are boring," Emma said, but she was already settling onto the floor beside the coffee table. "Your mom likes different things than we do," I said carefully, not wanting to criticize Jessica but not wanting to validate her dismissal of simple pleasures either. "That's okay. We can like what we like." That first weekend was a revelation. Without the distractions of Jessica's high-tech entertainment system, the children actually talked to me. Emma told me about her nightmares, the ones where she couldn't find me no matter how hard she looked. Jake confessed that he sometimes hid in his closet at Jessica's house when the grown-ups were too loud. "The grown-ups are loud there," I said, trying to understand. "Mommy's friends come over, and they laugh really loud and drink the wine that makes them silly," Jake explained. "And they use bad words." I filed that information away, along with Emma's casual mention that she wasn't supposed to talk about the boring stuff at Daddy's house when she was at Mommy's. The children were learning to compartmentalize their lives, to present different versions of themselves depending on which parent they were with. But in my apartment, they could just be kids. Emma discovered that she loved to draw, especially detailed pictures of houses with smoke coming from chimneys and families sitting around dinner tables. She'd spend hours at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration, creating elaborate scenes of domestic happiness. "This is us," she'd say, pointing to stick figures labeled Daddy, Emma, and Jake. "We're eating pancakes and laughing." Jake found his voice in those weekend cocoons. Away from Jessica's constant corrections and social pressures, he became animated and silly, telling jokes that made no sense and laughing at his own wit. His stutter, which had become pronounced during the divorce proceedings, virtually disappeared when he was relaxed and happy. The breakthrough came during our third weekend together. I was making breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast. Nothing fancy when Emma started crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use with Jessica, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, abandoning the stove to kneel beside her. "I don't want to go back," she whispered between sobs. "I want to stay here with you." "I want that too," I said, pulling her into my arms. "But we have to follow the rules right now," the judge said. "The judge is stupid," Jake announced from the living room, where he'd been building a fort out of couch cushions. "He doesn't know us." Out of the mouths of babes, the judge didn't know us. The lawyers didn't know us. The social workers and mediators and court-appointed advocates who'd made decisions about our lives had spent maybe 10 hours total in our presence. But these children knew exactly what they needed, and they weren't getting it 5 days a week. I started documenting everything after that weekend, not just the obvious improvements in their behavior and mood, but the small details that revealed their true state of mind. Emma's drawings became more elaborate and peaceful when she was at my apartment. Jake's vocabulary expanded when he wasn't worried about saying the wrong thing. They both slept through the night without nightmares or bedwetting incidents. The pattern became clear over the following months. Every Friday evening, I'd pick up 2 anxious, overstimulated children who'd been living in Jessica's pressure cooker of social expectations and performance. By Sunday morning, they'd transformed into relaxed, happy kids who giggled at breakfast and helped with simple chores without being asked. "Daddy, can we paint the kitchen?" Emma asked one Saturday morning, surveying the bland white walls with an artist's eye. "What color do you want?" I asked, already planning a trip to the hardware store. "Yellow," she said immediately. "Like sunshine." "And blue," Jake added. "Like the sky." We painted that kitchen together, making a glorious mess and creating something that was uniquely ours. Emma's handprints in yellow paint became permanent decorations beside the refrigerator. Jake's uneven brushstrokes along the baseboard became conversation pieces. When we were finished, the kitchen looked like a rainbow had exploded in it, and it was the most beautiful room I'd ever seen. Jessica was horrified when she saw the photos on my phone. "You let them paint the walls?" she asked, her voice carrying the tone she usually reserved for describing natural disasters. "It's their home too," I said. "They should be able to make it their own. It looks like a daycare center. What will people think?" "People will think children live here. Happy children." The art supplies multiplied as Emma's passion grew. She progressed from crayons to watercolors to pastels, each medium opening new possibilities for expression. Her drawings began telling stories not just of our weekend adventures, but of her fears and dreams, and the complex emotions she couldn't yet verbalize. One drawing particularly struck me. It showed two houses, one big and white and perfect, the other small and colorful and slightly crooked. In the big house, stick figures sat in separate rooms, each isolated behind their own walls. In the small house, the stick figures were gathered around a table, holding hands. "Tell me about this one," I said, sitting beside her on the living room floor. "That's Mommy's house." She pointed to the big one. "Everyone has their own room and their own things, and they don't talk very much. And this one, that's here. We're all together, and we're happy." I hung that drawing on my refrigerator, right next to Jake's handprints and Emma's first attempt at writing her name. It became a daily reminder of what we were building in this modest apartment, not just a living space, but a sanctuary where my children could be themselves without apology. The weekends weren't perfect. We had our challenges, our moments of frustration and tears, but they were real in a way that Jessica's Pinterest perfect lifestyle never was. When Jake had a meltdown about not being able to find his favorite toy, I helped him work through his feelings instead of distracting him with screen time. When Emma had a nightmare, I sat with her until she felt safe again. Instead of giving her medication to make the problem go away, by the end of each weekend, I'd see the light in their eyes dim slightly as Sunday evening approached. They'd pack their little suitcases with careful deliberation, tucking away drawings and small treasures they wanted to keep safe. The transition back to Jessica's world was always difficult, but they were learning to carry a piece of our weekend sanctuary with them. Those art supplies, simple tools that cost less than one of Jessica's dinners, became symbols of everything we'd built together. They represented creativity without judgment, expression without fear, and the radical idea that children should be allowed to make beautiful messes while they figure out who they are. Every Friday evening, when Emma would dig through that plastic bin and choose her colors for the weekend, I'd see hope in her eyes. She knew that in this small apartment, her feelings mattered, her creativity was valued, and her father's love was constant and unconditional. The art supplies were just the beginning. They were tools for building something Jessica's money couldn't. Be a foundation of love, acceptance, and genuine happiness that would sustain my children no matter what challenges lay ahead. Jessica's phone buzzes constantly during our custody exchanges, a steady stream of notifications from her increasingly popular social media accounts. She's built a following of 30,000 people who believe they know her story, the devoted, single mother struggling to provide for her children while their father fights his financial obligations. If only they knew the truth. I discovered the full extent of her online deception by accident. Emma had been talking about the picture days at her mom's house, elaborate setups where she and Jake would pose for what Jessica called family memories. When I asked to see some of these photos, Emma showed me Jessica's Instagram account on her tablet. The woman in those photos was someone I barely recognized. Gone was the anxious, controlling perfectionist I'd lived with for 7 years. In her place was a serene Earth Mother figure who made homemade organic snacks, led impromptu art projects, and radiated maternal contentment. The captions told a story of resilience and devotion that bore no resemblance to the reality I witnessed during custody exchanges. Single mom life is hard, but these beautiful souls make every sacrifice worth it, read one caption beneath a photo of Jessica and the children baking cookies. The image was perfectly staged flour, artfully dusted on the marble countertop, the children's faces glowing with happiness, Jessica beaming with maternal pride. I knew that photo was a lie. Emma had told me about the cookie disaster the weekend before, how Jessica had gotten angry when they made a mess and how the actual cookies had been thrown away because they were too ugly to eat. The professional quality image had been shot after the children were cleaned up and coached on how to smile, but her followers ate it up. Comments poured in about her strength, her dedication, her ability to create magic despite being abandoned by her ex. The narrative she'd constructed was compelling. Devoted mother working tirelessly to maintain stability while battling a system that favored deadbeat fathers. "You're an inspiration," one follower wrote. "My ex is trying to reduce his child support. 2. These men don't understand what it costs to raise children properly." Another comment cut deeper. "Your kids are so lucky to have you. I hope their father realizes what he's missing and steps up." I was missing plenty, but not by choice. Jessica's posts carefully omitted the court-ordered custody schedule that limited my time with the children. She never mentioned the support payments that left me eating ramen noodles 3 nights a week. The financial struggles she documented were self-deflated, the result of maintaining a lifestyle that required constant upgrades and additions. Her sponsored posts were particularly galling. Designer children's clothing companies, organic food brands, and luxury household products all paid Jessica to showcase their items as part of her authentic single mom journey. She was making thousands of dollars per month from these partnerships, while simultaneously claiming financial hardship in court documents, grateful for brands that support real families. She'd write beneath photos of Emma and Jake wearing $100 outfits, "Every partnership helps me provide the best for my babies." The irony was staggering. She was profiting from her divorce, while portraying herself as its victim. The disconnect between her online persona and reality became more apparent as I watched the children's reactions to her content creation. Emma had developed an instinctive understanding of when the phone was recording, automatically shifting into a performance mode that made my heart ache. Jake had learned to stay quiet during picture time, understanding that his natural exuberance was often incompatible with Jessica's aesthetic vision. "Mommy takes a lot of pictures," Emma explained during one of our weekend visits. "She says we have to look happy so people know we're okay." "What if you don't feel happy?" I asked. Emma shrugged with the resignation of someone far older than 7. "She says we can feel sad later, but right now we need to smile." The psychological manipulation inherent in this approach was disturbing. Jessica was teaching our children that authentic emotions were secondary to public image, that their value lay in their ability to perform happiness for strangers on the internet. The damage to their emotional development was something I documented carefully, though I knew it would be difficult to prove in court. Jessica's most popular posts were the ones where she appeared vulnerable and overwhelmed. Photos of her crying at the kitchen table while the children napped, captions about the loneliness of single motherhood, carefully crafted stories about the challenges of doing it all alone. These posts generated thousands of comments, offering support and sympathy, along with donations to a GoFundMe account she'd established for family emergencies. The emergency fund raised over $15,000 in 6 months, money that Jessica used for a kitchen renovation and a week-long vacation to Napa Valley with her girlfriends. When concerned followers asked about childcare during her trip, she explained that the children were spending quality time with their father, making my court-ordered custody time sound like a generous favor she was doing for me. Her phone had become an extension of her body, always within reach, constantly documenting moments that were then edited and filtered before being presented to the world. Real conversations were interrupted by notifications, family dinners were staged for content, and the children's genuine experiences were secondary to their potential as social media material. I began taking screenshots of Jessica's posts, building a file that revealed the extent of her deception. The timestamps alone told a story. Posts about single motherhood being so hard published while the children were with me. Glamorous dinner. Photos posted during times when she claimed to be too broke to buy groceries. Luxury purchases showcased days after filing motions for increased support. The most damaging discovery came when I noticed the geolocation data on her posts. Jessica had been claiming that work obligations prevented her from attending school events and parent-teacher conferences, but her social media revealed a different story. While missing Emma's school play, she'd been at a wine tasting in Sonoma. During Jake's parent-teacher conference, she'd been getting spa treatments with her influencer friends. Her followers didn't see these contradictions because Jessica carefully curated which aspects of her life she shared. The expensive dinners were framed as rare treats from generous friends. The designer shopping trips were presented as necessary investments in her brand. The nights out were portrayed as brief respites from the overwhelming demands of single motherhood. But the children saw everything. They witnessed the hours spent staging photos, the multiple takes required to get the perfect shot, the irritation when reality didn't match Jessica's vision. They were learning that love was performative, that family moments only mattered if they could be monetized, that their mother's attention was always divided between them and her phone. "Can you put your phone away during dinner?" Jake asked Jessica one evening when I picked them up. "Daddy doesn't understand that mommy has to work," Jessica replied, but I could see the defensive anger in her eyes. Work, as if exploiting our family's dysfunction for social media validation was a legitimate career, as if turning our children into content creators was a noble profession, as if building a following based on lies and manipulation was something to be proud of. The phone itself became a symbol of everything wrong with Jessica's priorities. While it contained thousands of photos of the children, most were carefully posed productions rather than candid moments of joy. The device that should have been a tool for staying connected had become a barrier between Jessica and genuine intimacy with our kids. During custody exchanges, I'd watch Jessica scroll through comments and engagement metrics while the children tried to tell her about their weekend. Her responses were distracted, performative, already thinking about how their stories might translate into content. The irony was devastating. She was documenting their lives obsessively while simultaneously missing out on actually living those moments with them. The final straw came when Jessica posted a video of Emma having what she called a creative breakthrough. In the carefully edited clip, Emma appeared to spontaneously create a beautiful watercolor painting while Jessica provided gentle encouragement in the background. The comments praised Jessica's nurturing of her daughter's artistic talents. But I knew the truth. Emma had painted that picture at my apartment the weekend before, using the supplies I'd bought for her. She'd proudly shown it to her mother, who had then recreated the scene with professional lighting and multiple camera angles. Emma's genuine moment of artistic joy had been commodified, repackaged, and sold to Jessica's followers as evidence of her superior parenting. That phone, with its endless notifications and constant demands for content, represented everything I was fighting against. It was a window into Jessica's alternate reality, where image mattered more than substance, where our children's well-being was secondary to maintaining her brand, and where the truth was whatever generated the most engagement. I printed out dozens of her posts, creating a file that revealed the systematic deception she'd built her online empire on. When the time came to challenge the custody arrangement, this evidence would show the court exactly who Jessica really was, not the devoted single mother she played online, but a woman who exploited her own children for social media fame while neglecting their genuine emotional needs. The phone that buzzed incessantly in her hand was more than a device. It was a weapon she'd used to destroy our family's privacy, exploit our children's innocence, and build a fortune on lies. But like all weapons, it could be turned against its wielder when the truth finally came to light. My journal sits beside my bed, a simple composition notebook where I record every detail of my children's lives during our time together. Each entry is dated and timed, written in the careful handwriting of a man who understands that words on paper might be the only thing standing between his children and a system that doesn't always see the truth. The documentation started almost by accident. During our second weekend together, Emma mentioned that she'd thrown up at school but hadn't told her teacher because mommy gets mad when I'm sick. I wrote it down, thinking it was just something to discuss with Jessica later. But as the weeks went on, these casual revelations accumulated into a disturbing pattern. "Daddy, I'm not supposed to tell you about mommy's friends," Jake whispered one Sunday morning as I made breakfast. "What about them?" I asked, keeping my voice casual while my hands grew tense around the spatula. "They come over when we're supposed to be sleeping and they're really loud, and sometimes they have sleepovers." I wrote it down. Date, time, Jake's exact words. 2 days later, Emma mentioned that she'd been scared by the man in the kitchen who'd been there when she got up for water. More notes. More questions forming in my mind about what was happening in Jessica's house when the cameras weren't rolling. My lawyer had advised me to document everything, but I was learning that everything included things I'd never thought to observe. The way Emma flinched when I raised my voice playfully during a game. How Jake hoarded snacks in his backpack, eating them secretly as if food might disappear. The careful way both children asked permission before touching anything in my apartment, as if they'd been trained to expect consequences for normal childhood behavior. The journal became my lifeline and my burden. Each entry was a small piece of evidence in what I hoped would eventually become a compelling case for custody modification. But reading back through the pages was heartbreaking, a record of 2 children learning to navigate an adult world that prioritized appearances over their emotional well-being. "Emma had another panic attack last night," I wrote after a particularly difficult weekend. "She woke up gasping, saying she dreamed that mommy forgot to pick her up from school. When I asked if this had happened before, she said sometimes mommy is busy with her phone and forgets stuff. Note, call Dr. Patterson to discuss treatment options." Dr. Patricia Patterson was the child psychologist I'd found through my insurance company. She specialized in children of divorce and had agreed to see Emma and Jake during my custody time. Getting Jessica to agree to therapy had required careful maneuvering. I'd framed it as support for the children's adjustment to our new family structure rather than treatment for problems I believed Jessica was causing. The psychological evaluations provided professional documentation of what I was seeing at home. Emma's anxiety levels were significantly elevated, with particular triggers around abandonment and perfectionism. Jake showed signs of emotional suppression and had developed several nervous habits: nail-biting, hair-twisting, a slight stutter that emerged when he was stressed. Both children demonstrate hypervigilance around parental approval, Dr. Patterson noted in her initial assessment. They seem unusually concerned with pleasing adults and avoiding conflict. This suggests an environment where emotional safety may be conditional on performance. I added her observations to my journal, along with my own notes about the children's behavior patterns. At Jessica's house, they were anxious and performance-oriented. At my apartment, they gradually relaxed into normal childhood behaviors, making messes, expressing frustration, asking for help without fear of judgment. The school provided another source of documentation. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had noticed significant changes in her behavior over the past year. Academic performance had declined, despite Emma being gifted. More concerning were the social issues. Emma had become withdrawn from her classmates and often seemed exhausted in class. "She's always been a bright child," Mrs. Rodriguez explained during a parent conference I attended alone because Jessica was traveling for business, but lately, she seems anxious about making mistakes. She erased her work multiple times, even when it's correct, and she's started asking if her mother will be disappointed in her grades. I took notes during that meeting too, adding them to the growing file I kept in a locked box in my bedroom closet. Bank statements showing my consistent support payments alongside Jessica's luxury purchases. Screenshots of her social media posts with timestamps revealing her lies about being overwhelmed and broke. Medical records showing Emma's anxiety medication, compliance or lack thereof. The pattern that emerged was damning. While Jessica projected an image of devoted motherhood online, the reality was a woman who prioritized her personal brand over her children's well-being. The kids were fed, clothed, and housed in luxury, but their emotional needs were secondary too. Jessica's need for content and validation. The breakthrough came when I started recording the children's conversations during car rides to and from custody exchanges. They felt safe in my truck, strapped into their seats with nowhere to perform, no cameras watching. That's when the truth came out. Mommy says we can't tell people about her crying, Emma mentioned during one drive, her voice made in the way children discuss extraordinary circumstances. Why does Mommy cry? I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. She says it's because Daddy is mean and won't give her enough money. But then her friends come over, and they drink wine and laugh really loud. More notes, more documentation. The picture was becoming clearer with each conversation, each observation, each professional assessment. Jessica was creating an environment where the children felt responsible for her emotional well-being while simultaneously neglecting their own needs. The medical records were particularly telling. Emma's anxiety medication had been prescribed after a series of panic attacks at school, but Jessica's compliance with the treatment plan was sporadic. Some months, the prescription would be filled promptly. Others, it would sit at the pharmacy for weeks, while Emma struggled with symptoms that could have been managed. She says the medicine makes me act weird, Emma explained when I asked about it. And weird isn't good for pictures. The callousness of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Jessica was prioritizing her social media aesthetic over our daughter's mental health treatment. The journal entry for that day was brief but damning. Emma off medication for 3 weeks because Jessica thinks it affects her appearance and photos. Child suffering from mother's vanity. My documentation expanded beyond the journal as I realized the scope of what I was uncovering. I created spreadsheets tracking the children's emotional states, their academic performance, their sleep patterns, their social development, charts showing the correlation between their time at Jessica's house and their anxiety levels, graphs demonstrating their improved behavior and mood during extended time with me. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. Family courts were reluctant to modify custody arrangements unless there was clear evidence of harm or neglect. Jessica's financial resources and polished presentation would work in her favor, while my blue-collar background and limited legal representation worked against me. But the journal kept growing, page by page, entry by entry. Each notation was a small act of defiance against a system that seemed designed to prioritize parental rights over children's well-being. Every conversation with teachers, therapists, and medical professionals was documented. Every improvement I witnessed in the children during our time together was recorded. The notebook itself was unremarkable, a standard composition book with a black and white speckled cover that cost 99 cents at the drugstore, but it contained something priceless. The truth about what was happening to my children, told in their own words and documented with the careful attention of a father who refused to let them suffer in silence. As I wrote the final entry for that chapter of our story, I realized the journal had become more than just evidence for a potential custody case. It was a record of my commitment to their well-being, proof that someone was paying attention to their needs and fighting for their future, even when the legal system seemed stacked against us. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I wrote, Day 127, since filing motion for custody modification. Emma slept through the night without nightmares for the 14th consecutive night at my apartment. Jake used complete sentences without stuttering during our entire conversation at dinner. Both children helped with chores without being asked, and expressed excitement about returning next weekend. Pattern clear. Children thrive in stable, attentive environment. Documentation continues. Emma's report card sits framed on my kitchen wall now, but that wasn't always the case. 6 months ago, that same report card was a source of heartbreak straight C's from a child who had tested as gifted, with teacher comments that painted a picture of a bright student struggling under invisible pressure. The parent-teacher conference was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon in November. Jessica was supposed to attend, but she'd texted me an hour before to cancel, claiming an urgent business meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. Her Instagram story from that same time showed her at a spa with friends, celebrating a brand partnership with a luxury skincare company. Mrs. Rodriguez greeted me in Emma's classroom, her warm smile not quite masking the concern in her eyes. The room was bright and welcoming, filled with student artwork and reading nooks that should have been Emma's sanctuary. Instead, I was learning it had become another source of stress for my 7-year-old daughter. Thank you for coming, Mr. Williams, Mrs. Rodriguez said, gesturing to a small table where Emma's work was spread out like evidence of a crime. I wish Mrs. Caldwell could have joined us. There are some things we need to discuss. She still used Jessica's maiden name, a deliberate choice that had emerged during our divorce. Ms. Williams feels too connected to her ex-husband, Jessica had explained to the school administration. Another small rejection, another way of erasing our shared history. Emma is an exceptionally bright child, Mrs. Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the careful tone teachers use when delivering difficult news. Her cognitive testing places her in the 95th percentile for her age group, but her current performance doesn't reflect that ability. She showed me Emma's recent assignments, each one a study in eraser marks and careful corrections. What should have been quick, Confident work for a gifted child instead looked like the labored efforts of someone terrified of making mistakes. Look at this math worksheet. Mrs. Rodriguez pointed to a paper covered in faint pencil marks. Emma got every answer right, but she erased and rewrote each one multiple times. When I asked her why, she said she wanted to make sure her numbers were pretty enough. Pretty enough. At 7 years old, Emma was already learning that appearance mattered more than accuracy, that the way something looked was more important than whether it was correct. In this creative writing assignment, the teacher continued, showing me a story Emma had written about a family of rabbits. The handwriting was neat to the point of being mechanical, each letter carefully formed, but lacking the natural flow of a child's authentic expression. I asked the students to write about something that made them happy. Mrs. Rodriguez explained, most children write messy, enthusiastic stories full of spelling, errors, and run-on sentences. Emma's story is technically perfect, but it reads like she was trying to write what she thought I wanted to hear rather than what she actually felt. I read Emma's story about the rabbit family who lived in a perfect burrow and never fought or made messes. The young rabbit in the story spent her days making sure everything was clean and organized so her rabbit mother would be proud. It was heartbreaking in its perfection, a 7-year-old's attempt to create a narrative that would earn approval rather than express genuine emotion. Has she mentioned being worried about her grades? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Constantly, she asks me several times a day if her work is good enough. Last week, she cried when she got an M- on a spelling test because she was afraid her mother would be disappointed. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out a folder containing more concerning evidence. Emma's social development had regressed significantly. Over the past year, she'd stopped participating in group activities, preferring to work alone where she could control every variable. During recess, she often sat by herself, watching other children play but not joining in. The other children have tried to include her, the teacher explained, but Emma seems afraid to engage in anything spontaneous or messy. Last month, during art class, she had a panic attack when another student accidentally bumped her and smudged her painting. A panic attack at school over a smudged painting. I made a mental note to add this to my documentation file. Another piece of evidence showing how Jessica's perfectionism was destroying our daughter's childhood. What about Jake? I asked. How is he doing in kindergarten? Mrs. Rodriguez's expression grew even more troubled. Jake is different. Mrs. Patterson, his teacher, has some concerns I think you should hear directly. We walked down the hallway to Jake's classroom, passing artwork and projects that celebrated childhood creativity and exploration. I wondered if my son felt as constrained here as Emma did, if he was also learning to suppress his natural exuberance in favor of artificial perfection. Mrs. Patterson was younger than Mrs. Rodriguez, with the energy and enthusiasm typical of kindergarten teachers, but her usual brightness dimmed when she began discussing Jake's behavior. Jake is incredibly intelligent, she began, but he's also incredibly guarded. It's unusual for a 5-year-old to be so, controlled. She showed me examples of Jake's work, and the pattern was similar to Emmer's, technically proficient, but emotionally sterile. His drawings were precise and neat, lacking the wild creativity typical of kindergarten art. His responses to journal prompts were careful and safe, avoiding any mention of feelings or personal experiences. During sharing time, most children want to tell stories about their weekends, their pets, their families, Mrs. Patterson explained. Jake only shares neutral facts: what he ate for breakfast, what show he watched on TV. When I ask him about his feelings or experiences, he gets very quiet. She pulled out a drawing Jake had made during a lesson about families, while other children had drawn chaotic, colorful scenes of parents and siblings and pets. Jake's family portrait was starkly divided. On one side of the paper was a large house with 2 small figures standing far apart. On the other side was a smaller house with 3 figures clustered together, all smiling. When I asked him to tell me about his drawing, he said, "This is my mom's house, where we have to be quiet. And this is my dad's house, where we can be loud." The simplicity of that statement hit me like a punch to the gut. My 5-year-old son had identified the fundamental difference between his 2 homes in a way that no adult psychological assessment could have captured more clearly. Mrs. Patterson continued with more observations that painted a disturbing picture. Jake had developed several nervous habits: twisting his hair when stressed, biting his nails until they bled, and a stutter that emerged whenever he was asked to talk about home or family. Last week he fell during recess and scraped his knee, she said. Most children would cry or want comfort, but Jake just stood up and said, "I'm fine. I'm not supposed to be hurt." When I tried to clean his cut, he flinched away and said he didn't want to be any trouble. A 5-year-old who didn't want to be any trouble, who had learned that being hurt or needing comfort was somehow wrong. I thought about all the times Jake had come to me with scraped knees and bruised feelings, how he'd gradually relaxed into accepting care and comfort during our weekends together. Both teachers had documented their concerns in formal reports that would become part of the children's permanent academic records. The pattern of emotional suppression, perfectionism, and anxiety was clear and well documented by professionals who had no agenda beyond the children's well-being. "Have you discussed these concerns with their mother?" I asked. though I suspected I knew the answer. We've tried, Mrs. Rodriguez said diplomatically. Mrs. Caldwell is often traveling for business, and when she does attend school events, she seems more focused on documenting the experience than engaging with the educational content. A polite way of saying that Jessica was too busy taking photos for social media to pay attention to her children's actual needs. I'd seen it myself during the few school events we'd both attended. Jessica positioning the children for perfect shots while missing their actual performances. The teachers had more to share. Emma's academic performance fluctuated dramatically depending on her emotional state. During weeks when she seemed particularly anxious, her work suffered, but there had been brief periods, usually after weekends. With Miwin, her natural intelligence shone through, and she produced work that demonstrated her true capabilities. It's like she's two different children, Mrs. Rodriguez observed. Some days she comes in relaxed and confident, eager to participate and take creative risks. Other days, she's withdrawn and fearful, unwilling to attempt anything unless she's certain it will be perfect. Jake showed similar patterns. His speech impediment was most pronounced on Monday mornings and improved throughout the week, suggesting that whatever was happening in his weekend environment was affecting his confidence and communication skills. As our conference concluded, both teachers emphasized their willingness to support any interventions that might help the children. They'd already recommended counseling and were prepared to provide documentation for any legal proceedings that might benefit Emma and Jake's well-being. Walking out of the school that day, I carried not just Emma's disappointing report card, but a clear professional assessment of the damage being done to both my children. Their teachers trained observers who spent more waking hours with Emma and Jake than either parent had identified a pattern of emotional suppression and anxiety that correlated directly with their home environment. The report card itself became a symbol of everything that was wrong, not because the grades were bad, though they were disappointing for children of their ability, but because they represented the cost of prioritizing image over authenticity. Emma and Jake were capable of so much more, but they were being taught that safety lay in mediocrity, that standing out invited criticism, that their worth was measured by their ability to avoid making mistakes rather than their courage to try new things. I laminated that report card and hung it on my kitchen wall, not as a celebration but as a reminder of what we were fighting for. Every time I looked at those disappointing grades, I saw two brilliant children who deserved the chance to fail, to explore, to be messy and creative and authentically themselves. The next report card would tell a different story. I was determined to make sure of that. Dr. Patricia Chen's business card sits in my wallet, worn soft from handling, a lifeline I carry everywhere. Finding her was like discovering water in a desert. Professional who not only understood what my children were experiencing but was willing to help document the truth that everyone else seemed determined to ignore. The referral came from Mrs. Rodriguez, who had worked with Dr. Chen on several cases involving children of high-conflict divorces. She specializes in helping kids process difficult family transitions. The teacher had explained carefully, using the diplomatic language educators master. When discussing family dysfunction, Dr. Chen's office was nothing like the sterile institutional spaces where my children had been subjected to court-ordered evaluations. Warm colors, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books and toys created an environment where healing actually seemed possible. When I first met her, I was struck by her calm presence and the way she listened, not just to words, but to the meaning behind them. "Tell me about your children," she said during our initial consultation, and for the first time in months, someone seemed genuinely interested in the answer. I told her about Emma's anxiety attacks, Jake's regression, the way both children walked on eggshells when they talked about their mother. I showed her my documentation, the journal entries and teacher reports that painted a picture of two children struggling under impossible pressure. Dr. Chen reviewed everything methodically, asking questions that revealed her deep understanding of family trauma. She didn't dismiss my concerns or suggest that the children just needed time to adjust. Instead, she validated what I'd been observing and offered professional insight into the psychological mechanisms at work. Children in high-conflict custody situations often develop hypervigilance, she explained. They learn to monitor their environment constantly for signs of danger or disapproval. This is exactly what you're describing with Emma's perfectionism and Jake's emotional suppression. Her assessment sessions with the children were revelatory, using play therapy techniques and age-appropriate communication tools. Dr. Chen was able to help Emma and Jake express feelings they'd been taught to hide. The breakthrough came during their third session, when Emma finally felt safe enough to talk about her worry monster. "It lives in my tummy," Emma explained to Dr. Chen, using art supplies to draw a dark, jagged creature. "It gets really big when I'm at Mommy's house because I have to be perfect all the time. But at Daddy's house, it gets smaller because I can make mistakes and he still loves me." Jake's revelations were equally profound. Through play with family dolls, he recreated scenarios that showed his understanding of the different emotional climates in his two homes. In the mommy house, the dolls stood rigid and separate, speaking in whisper voices. in the daddy house. They hugged and laughed and sometimes fell down without consequences. Dr. Chen's professional documentation of these sessions provided powerful evidence of the children's emotional states. Her reports were carefully worded, but clear in their implications. Both children showed signs of chronic stress and anxiety that improved significantly when they felt emotionally safe and accepted. Emma demonstrates classic symptoms of performance anxiety and perfectionism that appear to be environmentally triggered. Dr. Chen wrote in her assessment, Jake shows signs of emotional suppression and had significant improvement in their emotional regulation when they feel secure in their environment and confident that their authentic selves are acceptable. But Dr. Chen wasn't just gathering evidence, she was actively helping my children heal. She taught Emma breathing techniques for managing anxiety and helped her understand that mistakes were part of learning, not failures to be feared. She worked with Jake on expressing his feelings through drawing and play, gradually helping him find his voice again. The changes were remarkable. Emma's anxiety attacks became less frequent and less severe. Jake's stutter diminished to the point where it was barely noticeable. Both children began showing more resilience and emotional flexibility, skills that would serve them well regardless of what happened with the custody situation. Dr. Chen also provided guidance for me, helping me understand how to support the children's emotional development while navigating the complexities of the legal system. She explained concepts like parallel parenting and protective factors that helped me create the most stable environment possible during my custody time. You can't control what happens in their other home, she reminded me during one of our sessions, but you can make sure that your home is a place where they feel unconditionally loved and accepted. That kind of consistent security becomes an internal resource they can draw on even when they're in more stressful environments. Her network of colleagues became an unexpected source of support. Dr. Chen had worked with other families going through similar situations and was able to connect me with resources I never would have found on my own. A family law attorney who specialized in cases involving children's mental health, a guardian ad litem who had experience with social media exploitation, a child advocate who understood the unique challenges of high-conflict custody disputes. The pediatrician she recommended, Dr. Sarah Martinez, became another crucial ally. Dr. Martinez reviewed Emma's anxiety medication history and was appalled by the inconsistent treatment Jessica had provided. She documented the correlation between Emma's untreated anxiety and her academic and social struggles, providing medical evidence that complemented Dr. Chen's psychological assessments. This child has been suffering unnecessarily, Dr. Martinez stated bluntly after reviewing Emma's medical records. Anxiety medication isn't something you start and stop based on convenience or aesthetic preferences. This pattern of inconsistent treatment is concerning from both a medical and child welfare perspective. The network continued to expand. Mrs. Rodriguez connected me with other teachers who had worked with the children over the years, all of whom had similar concerns about their emotional well-being. The school counselor, Ms. Thompson, had been documenting Emma's frequent visits to her office during particularly stressful periods. She often comes to me on Mondays, Ms. Thompson explained, saying she feels sick but can't identify what's wrong. Classic signs of anxiety manifesting as physical symptoms. She's learned to associate returning to school after weekends at home with feelings of dread. Even some of Jessica's former friends began reaching out, women who had grown uncomfortable with her increasingly erratic behavior and obvious neglect of the children's emotional needs. One former colleague, Maria Santos, had witnessed several incidents that painted a disturbing picture of Jessica's priorities. I was at a playdate at Jessica's house. Maria told me during a careful conversation over coffee, Emma had a meltdown because she spilled juice on her dress, and instead of comforting her, Jessica got angry because it would ruin the photos she wanted to take. She actually made Emma change clothes and reshot the scene with Jake pretending to spill the juice, so she could document how gracefully she handled it. These allies didn't emerge all at once, but gradually. As word spread through the network of professionals and parents who genuinely cared about children's well-being, each person who stepped forward added another piece to the puzzle, another voice willing to speak truth about what they'd observed. Dr. Chen coordinated much of this support network, understanding that complex family situations required comprehensive intervention. She facilitated communication between the various professionals involved in the children's lives, ensuring that everyone was working toward the same Galima and Jake's emotional health and stability. The transformation in my children became evidence in itself. As they felt safer expressing their authentic selves, their natural personalities began to emerge. Emma's creativity flourished when she wasn't worried about making mistakes. Jake's humor and enthusiasm returned as he learned that his emotions were valid and welcome. These improvements were documented by every professional in their support network. Report cards improved. Behavioral assessments showed decreased anxiety and increased emotional regulation. Medical records reflected better sleep patterns and fewer stress-related physical symptoms. Dr. Chen's business card, worn smooth in my wallet, represented more than just one professional relationship. It symbolized the beginning of a coalition of adults who were willing to put children's needs before politics, who understood that sometimes the system fails kids, and that caring adults have to step up to bridge the gap. Building a support network takes time, Dr. Chen reminded me during one of our sessions, but once you have people who truly understand what's happening, they become advocates not just for your case, but for your children's future. She was right. What started with one business card became a community of professionals in caring, adults who refused to let Emma and Jake suffer in silence. They provided not just documentation for legal proceedings, but hope for healing and evidence that someone was finally listening to what the children had been trying to say all along. The card in my wallet was a reminder that we weren't alone in this fight. For the first time since the divorce began, I felt like we had a real chance, not just of changing the custody arrangement, but of giving my children the support they needed to recover from the trauma they'd experienced and build healthy, authentic lives. The private investigator's report landed on my doorstep like a declaration of war. 43 pages of attempted character assassination that revealed more about Jessica's desperation than my supposed failings. The manila envelope bore the return address of Steinberg and Associates, Jessica's high-powered legal team. But the contents showed the handiwork of someone far more aggressive than even Harold Steinberg. Marcus Williams' subject investigation summary. The cover page read in bold letters, beneath it, a photo of me leaving my apartment for work, taken with a telephoto lens from someone lurking in the parking lot. The violation of privacy was disturbing enough, but the sheer scope of the investigation revealed how threatened Jessica felt by my growing case for custody modification. Robert Caldwell's money had bought thoroughness, if not accuracy. The investigator had spent 3 months documenting my daily routines, interviewing former employees, and attempting to find evidence that I was unfit to parent my own children. The results were both laughable and infuriating, a desperate attempt to portray a hard-working father as an unstable threat. Subject maintains a regular work schedule consistent with construction industry employment, the report noted, as if building houses according to weather conditions and client needs was evidence of poor character. Frequently works overtime and weekends, suggesting potential neglect of parental responsibilities. The irony was staggering. During my marriage to Jessica, her family had criticized me for not working enough, for lacking the ambition to provide the lifestyle she deserved. Now, my work ethic was being weaponized against me, twisted into evidence that I cared more about my job than my children. The financial section was particularly creative in its misrepresentation. My income was characterized as unstable and unpredictable, despite 8 years of consistent profitability and growth. The investigator had somehow obtained copies of my tax returns and business records, then selectively quoted figures to suggest financial irresponsibility. Subject's business shows significant seasonal variation in income, the report stated, conveniently omitting the fact that this was normal for construction companies and that my average annual income had increased every year since the divorce. They'd even criticized my modest living situation, describing my apartment as substandard housing, inappropriate for children, while ignoring the fact that it was clean, safe, and filled with love. The personal attacks were more troubling. The investigator had interviewed several of my former employees, fishing for negative comments about my character or management style. Most had apparently refused to participate, but a few disgruntled workers had provided ammunition for Jessica's legal team. Former employee states that subject has anger management issues and frequently yells at workers, one section claimed. This was based on a single conversation with Tommy Rich, a carpenter I'd fired 2 years earlier for showing up drunk to job sites. The report failed to mention Tommy's alcohol problems or the fact that his dismissal had been necessary for workplace safety. The most disturbing section focused on my personal life, complete with photographs taken without my knowledge or consent, pictures of me grocery shopping, walking to my truck, even exercising at the local gym. The investigator had cataloged my routines as if I were a suspect in a criminal case rather than a father fighting for his children. Subject appears to live an isolated lifestyle with limited social connections, the report concluded, apparently viewing my focus on work and parenting as evidence of antisocial behavior. The fact that I didn't spend my evenings at bars or my weekends at parties was somehow twisted into a character flaw, but the investigation had backfired in ways Jessica's team clearly hadn't anticipated. In their zeal to find dirt on me, they'd inadvertently documented my stability and dedication. The photographs showed a man who went to work every day, shopped for healthy groceries, maintained his physical fitness, and kept regular routines. The evidence of my supposed unfitness actually painted a picture of a responsible adult living a boring, stable life. More damaging to Jessica's case was what the investigation revealed about her own behavior. While following me, the investigator had also documented the times when I was supposed to have the children, but they were at Jessica's house instead. Photos showed me arriving for scheduled custody exchanges only to find no one home. Dates and times that corresponded exactly with Jessica's emergency cancellations. The investigator had also captured Jessica's comings and goings during times when she was supposed to be caring for the children. One particularly damning series of photos showed her leaving the house at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night, dressed for clubbing, while the children's bedroom windows remained dark. She didn't return until 3 a.m., according to the timestamps. By my attorney, Jim Morrison, was both outraged and delighted when I showed him the report. "This is exactly the kind of overreach that backfires in family court," he explained. "Judges don't like it when parents weaponize private investigators against each other, especially when the evidence is this thin." But Jim also warned me that the investigation was just the beginning of Jessica's counterattack. "She's feeling threatened by your documentation and the support network you've built. Expect this to get nastier before it gets better." He was right. Within days of receiving the investigator's report, I started getting calls from the Department of Children and Family Services. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint, alleging that I was emotionally abusing the children during custody visit. The caseworker, Maria Santos, was professional but thorough in her investigation. "We take all reports seriously," she explained during her initial visit to my apartment. "I'll need to interview you and the children separately, and I'll be conducting a home study to assess the living conditions." The DCFS investigation was clearly Jessica's handiwork, though she'd been careful to make the complaint anonymously. The allegations were vague but serious claims that I was psychologically manipulating the children and alienating them from their mother. The irony was breathtaking, considering Jessica's documented emotional neglect and exploitation of the children for social media content. Maria Santos was experienced enough to see through the manufactured crisis. During her interviews with Emma and Jake, both children spoke positively about their time with me and showed no signs of fear or psychological abuse. Their descriptions of our weekend activities, cooking together, playing games, doing homework, a picture of normal, healthy parent-child interactions. "These children are clearly comfortable with you," Maria observed after completing her assessment. "They speak freely, make eye contact, and show appropriate affection. The allegations in the complaint don't match what I'm observing." The home study went equally well. My apartment might have been modest, but it was clean, safe, and child-friendly. Emma and Jake's bedroom was filled with their artwork, books, and toys. The refrigerator was stocked with healthy food, and the children's schedule was posted on a bulletin board, evidence of structure and planning. "This is actually one of the more stable environments I've visited recently," Maria admitted as she completed her paperwork. "The children have their own space, clear routines, and a parent who's actively engaged in their daily lives." But the DCFS investigation served Jessica's purpose anyway. Even though the case was quickly closed with no findings of abuse or neglect, it created a paper trail that her lawyers could reference in court documents. The mere existence of the investigation could be twisted to suggest ongoing concerns about my fitness as a parent. The harassment escalated from there. Anonymous complaints were filed with my business licensing board, alleging unsafe work practices that required investigation. My landlord received calls claiming that I was violating lease terms by having the children stay overnight. Even my insurance company was contacted with false claims about my driving record. Each attack was designed to drain my resources and energy, forcing me to spend time and money defending against baseless allegations instead of focusing on building my custody case. Jessica's family had unlimited funds to wage this war of attrition. While I was already stretched thin paying for legal representation and therapy for the children, the pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. While I was documenting genuine concerns about the children's well-being with professional support and objective evidence, Jessica was responding with personal attacks and manufactured crises. The contrast between our approaches would ultimately work in my favor, but the immediate effect was exhausting and demoralizing. The private investigator's report, intended to destroy my credibility, instead became evidence of Jessica's willingness to violate privacy and twist facts to serve her agenda. The failed DCFS investigation demonstrated her readiness to weaponize child protective services for personal gain. Each attack revealed more about her character than mine. My support network rallied around me during this difficult period. Dr. Chen provided documentation showing that the children's progress continued. Despite the increased conflict, Mrs. Rodriguez wrote a letter supporting my parenting and noting the children's improved performance at school. Even some of Jessica's former friends quietly reached out to offer their observations about her concerning behavior. The investigative report, with its 43 pages of manufactured outrage and selective misrepresentation, ultimately became a symbol of everything wrong with Jessica's approach to our custody dispute. While I was focused on the children's well-being and emotional health, she was focused on winning at any cost, even if it meant traumatizing Emma and Jake in the process. The manila envelope that had arrived like a threat became evidence for my case, proof that Jessica would stop at nothing to maintain control, regardless of the damage to our children's emotional security. Sometimes the best defense against character assassination is simply living a life that speaks for itself, and the investigator's own photographs had documented exactly that kind of life. The war Jessica had declared would continue, but she'd already revealed her weapons and shown her willingness to prioritize victory over the children's well-being. That revelation would prove more damaging to her case than anything the private investigator could have discovered about mine. Jake's drawing sits on my kitchen table as I write this. A simple crayon sketch that became the most powerful piece of evidence in our custody case. It shows a house split down the middle, one side dark and rigid, the other bright and welcoming. In the dark side, small figures stand alone in separate rooms. In the bright side, 3 figures hold hands around a dinner table, all of them smiling. When the court appointed Jennifer Walsh as guardian ad litem for Emma and Jake, I felt a mixture of hope and terror. The gal would be the children's voice. In legal proceedings, tasked with investigating their living situations and making recommendations about their best interests, everything would depend on her ability to see past Jessica's polished performance to the reality of our children's emotional lives. Jennifer was a former social worker with 15 years of experience in family court cases. She had a reputation for thoroughness and an ability to connect with children that made her recommendations carry significant weight with judges. During our first meeting, she explained her process with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by adult conflicts. "I'll be spending time with both children in various settings," she told me. "At each parent's home, at school, and in my office. I'll also be reviewing all documentation related to their care, including medical records, school reports, and any therapeutic interventions." The investigation began with interviews at both homes. Jessica prepared for Jennifer's visit with the same attention to detail she applied to her social media content. The house was spotless. Organic snacks were artfully arranged, and educational activities were strategically placed throughout the living spaces. She'd even hired a photographer to document the children's typical day in their beautiful home. But children can't maintain performances indefinitely, especially 7- and 5-year-olds who were already emotionally exhausted from months of living in a fishbowl. Jennifer's trained. I noticed what Jessica's followers missed: the way Emma checked her mother's face before answering questions, how Jake flinched when he accidentally knocked over a cup of juice, the careful distance the children maintained from anything that might create mess or disorder. "Tell me about your favorite things to do at Mommy's house," Jennifer asked Emma during their first conversation. Emma's response was telling in its careful neutrality. "We take pictures from Mommy's computer, and we eat healthy food, and we practice being good." "What does being good mean?" Jennifer probed gently. "It means being quiet and not making messes and smiling when Mommy's friends come over." Jake's interview was even more revealing. When asked about his daily routine at Jessica's house, he described a schedule that would challenge most adults. Wake up at 6:30 for yoga and meditation photographed for Jessica's wellness brand. Organic breakfast eaten without spills. Quiet time while Mommy worked on her computer. Afternoon activities chosen for their photogenic potential. "Do you ever get to just play?" Jennifer asked. Jake looked confused by the question. "Play how?" "However you want. Running around, being loud, making a fort out of pillows." "Mommy doesn't like loud," Jake said simply, "and pillows are for sleeping." The contrast with their behavior at my apartment was striking. Jennifer arrived during one of our regular weekend visits to find the children engaged in the kind of chaotic, joyful play that's typical of their age group. Emma was painting at the kitchen table, her clothes splattered with watercolors, while Jake built an elaborate castle out of cardboard boxes in the living room. "This is my dragon castle," Jake announced proudly, showing Jennifer through the structure that had taken most of the morning to construct. "Daddy helped me cut the windows, but I decided where they should go." Emma barely looked up from her artwork, too absorbed in her creative process to worry about making a good impression. Her painting was wild and expressive, full of bright colors and fantastical creatures that revealed an imagination finally free to explore. "I'm painting the worry monster," she told Jennifer matter-of-factly. "Dr. Chen says if I paint him, he gets smaller." Jennifer spent over an hour observing the children's natural interactions with me and with each other. She watched me help Jake rebuild his castle when it collapsed, saw how I encouraged Emma's artistic expression without worrying about the mess, observed the easy affection and communication that flowed between us. "The difference in their demeanor is remarkable," Jennifer noted in her preliminary report. At their mother's residence, both children displayed hypervigilance and performance anxiety. At their father's residence, they exhibited age behavior, creativity, and emotional security. The school visits provided additional context. Jennifer interviewed both teachers and observed the children in their classroom environments. Mrs. Rodriguez shared her concerns about Emma's perfectionism and anxiety, while Mrs. Patterson discussed Jake's emotional suppression and difficulty with peer interactions. "Emma seems to carry a tremendous burden of worry," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "She's constantly asking if her work is good enough, if she's disappointing anyone. It's heartbreaking to see in such a young child." Jake's teacher had similar observations. "He's incredibly bright, but he holds himself back. He won't participate in activities that might result in failure or mess. Last week, he refused to finger paint because he was afraid he might do it wrong." Jennifer's most important tool was Her ability to create safe spaces where the children could express their authentic feelings, in her office, surrounded by toys and art supplies, away from both parents' influence, Emma and Jake gradually began to share their experiences. The breakthrough came when Jennifer asked them to draw pictures of their families. Emma's drawing showed two distinct worlds: the perfect, sterile environment of Jessica's house and the warm, chaotic comfort of my apartment. Jake's picture was even more direct, showing himself and Emma as small figures standing between two much larger adults. Figures pulled in different directions. "Sometimes I feel like I'm two different kids," Emma told Jennifer during one of their sessions. "Happy Emma who lives with Daddy, and careful Emma who lives with Mommy." Jake's description was simpler but equally profound. "At Daddy's house, I can be loud. At Mommy's house, I have to be like a statue." Jennifer documented these conversations with the careful attention of someone who understood their legal significance. The children's own words became the most compelling evidence in the case, not the manufactured drama of adult conflicts, but the simple truth of two young people describing their daily emotional reality. The gal's investigation also uncovered troubling details about Jessica's parenting that hadn't been documented elsewhere. During one visit, Jennifer witnessed Jessica becoming frustrated with Jake's inability to pronounce a word correctly for a video she was making. Instead of helping him or accepting his developmental limitations, Jessica made him repeat the word dozens of times until he became upset and began stuttering. "It's important that Jake speaks clearly for the camera," Jessica explained when Jennifer questioned the interaction. "His speech problems are embarrassing." Jennifer also observed Jessica's response to Emma's anxiety attack during a particularly stressful photo session. Instead of comforting her daughter, Jessica became irritated that the incident would delay her posting schedule. She gave Emma a tablet to distract her rather than addressing the underlying emotional distress. "Both children demonstrate signs of chronic stress that appear to be environment-specific," Jennifer wrote in her preliminary findings. "Their emotional regulation improves significantly in environments where they feel secure and accepted for their authentic selves." The most damning evidence came from the children themselves during Jennifer's final interviews. When asked directly about their preferences, both Emma and Jake expressed clear desires about their living arrangements. "I want to live with Daddy," Emma said quietly but firmly. "I love Mommy, but I'm tired of being careful all the time." Jake's statement was even more direct. "Daddy's house feels like home. Mommy's house feels like being at the doctor." Jennifer's final report was comprehensive and unambiguous in its While acknowledging Jessica's financial resources and good intentions, she concluded that the children's emotional well-being was being compromised by the pressure to maintain her public image and social media brand. Both children would benefit from increased stability and reduced performance pressure, Jennifer wrote. Their father's home environment, while more modest in material resources, provides the emotional security and authentic acceptance necessary for healthy child development. The children's drawings, their recorded statements, and Jennifer's professional observations created an irrefutable case for custody modification. Their voices, finally heard by someone with the authority to act on their behalf, had spoken a truth that no amount of legal maneuvering could contradict. Jake's simple crayon drawing of two houses, one dark and divided, one bright and unified, became a symbol of everything the case was really about. Not adult egos or financial considerations, but the fundamental right of children to live in environments where they felt safe to be themselves. The Guardian ad litem's report would be the turning point in our custody battle. But more importantly, it represented the moment when Emma and Jake's emotional needs finally took priority over the adult conflicts that had defined their lives. For too long, their voices, preserved in Jennifer's careful documentation, would finally be heard by a judge with the power to change their daily reality. Jessica's credit card statements arrived in a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. 3 years of financial records that told a story of staggering irresponsibility and misplaced priorities. The court-ordered financial discovery had been a double-edged sword. While exposing my modest but stable finances to scrutiny, it also revealed the shocking truth about how Jessica spent money meant for our children's care. The numbers were staggering. In the 18 months since our divorce, Jessica had spent over $45,000 on personal expenses while claiming financial hardship and requesting increased child support. The credit card statements read like a catalog of self-indulgence: luxury, spa treatments, designer clothing, expensive dinners at trendy restaurants, weekend getaways with friends. One particularly egregious charge caught my attention: $3,200 for professional photography sessions during the same month. She'd claimed she couldn't afford Emma's anxiety medication, while our daughter suffered from untreated panic attacks. Jessica was investing in content creation for her social media brand. Subject claims insufficient funds for children's medical needs, while simultaneously spending thousands on personal luxury items, my attorney noted in his analysis of the financial records. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but the pattern was clear to anyone willing to examine the evidence. The children's actual expenses told a different story entirely. School tuition and fees were often paid late, resulting in penalty charges that could have been avoided with better financial planning. Emma's therapeutic services were frequently canceled due to budget constraints. While Jessica spent comparable amounts on beauty treatments and personal shopping, most disturbing were the charges. Related to Jessica's social media activities, she'd spent over $8,000 on professional staging and photography equipment. Turning our children's care into a business expense, ring lights, backdrop stands, and camera equipment were purchased with money that should have gone toward their emotional, support, and educational needs. The contrast with my own financial records was stark. My expenses were boringly responsible: rent, utilities, groceries, and children's necessities. The most extravagant purchases in my records were art supplies for Emma and educational toys for Jake. While Jessica was buying designer outfits for social media photos, I was clipping coupons to afford their favorite breakfast cereal. But the financial discovery revealed something even more troubling than Jessica's poor spending habits. It exposed the web of deception she'd built around her actual financial situation while claiming poverty in court documents. She was receiving substantial financial support from her family that she'd failed to disclose. Bank records showed regular deposits from Robert Caldwell, Jessica's father, often coinciding with her most expensive purchases. A $5,000 deposit would appear in her account, followed immediately by charges for luxury items or vacation expenses. The pattern suggested that her father was funding her lifestyle while she cried poverty to the court. These undisclosed financial resources are material to the custody determination. Jim Morrison explained as we reviewed the evidence. If Jessica has access to family money, her claims of financial instability become fraudulent. The discovery process also revealed the true scope of Jessica's social media income. Sponsored posts, affiliate marketing, and brand partnerships had generated over $30,000 in the past year, income she'd significantly underreported in her financial disclosures. She was literally profiting from her role as a struggling single mother while hiding the revenue from the court. Her partnership agreements were particularly revealing. One contract with a luxury children's clothing brand required her to post weekly content featuring Emma and Jake wearing their products. The compensation was $2,000 per month, plus free clothing money that should have been considered part of her income for support calculations. Another agreement with an organic food company paid Jessica $500 per sponsored post featuring family meals. The irony was crushing. She was being paid to portray herself as a devoted mother, carefully nurturing her children with healthy foods, while simultaneously claiming she couldn't afford basic medical care for them. The financial records painted a picture of someone living a champagne lifestyle on a beer budget, subsidized by family money and social media income she refused to acknowledge. Meanwhile, she was demanding increased support from me while I worked 60-hour weeks to meet my existing obligations. But children's actual needs were lost in this financial chaos. Emma's therapy sessions were sporadic because Jessica claimed the copays were too expensive, yet she'd spend 3 times the annual therapy cost on a single weekend spa retreat. Jake's speech therapy was discontinued for budgetary reasons, while Jessica invested in professional video editing software for her content creation. My own financial situation, while modest, demonstrated consistent prioritization of the children's needs. Every purchase related to their care was documented and reasonable. Art supplies, books, educational games, and healthy groceries took precedence over any personal wants. The contrast in our spending patterns revealed everything about our respective priorities. The most damning evidence came from Jessica's own social media posts, where she inadvertently documented her financial lies. Photos of expensive dinners were posted with captions about treating myself after a hard week, while her court filings from the same period claimed she was surviving on ramen noodles. Pictures of shopping sprees coincided with legal documents claiming financial desperation. Her followers, unaware of the custody battle or her court claims, often commented on her obvious wealth goals. One follower wrote beneath a photo of Jessica's designer handbag collection, "I wish I could afford to live like this." Another commented on her vacation photos, "Single mom life looks pretty amazing for you." The disconnect between her public image and her legal claims created a credibility problem that her expensive lawyers couldn't overcome. You can't simultaneously claim poverty in court while flaunting wealth on social media, especially when the financial records prove the wealth is real and the poverty is manufactured. Jessica's response to the financial discovery was predictably defensive. She claimed the family financial support was gifts rather than income, despite the regular and substantial nature of the transfers. She insisted her social media earnings were irregular and unpredictable, ignoring the signed contracts that guaranteed monthly payments. Most audaciously, she claimed that her expensive lifestyle was necessary for maintaining her brand and generating income. The $3,200 photography sessions were business expenses required for her work as an influencer. The designer clothing was professional wardrobe needed for sponsored content. Mrs. Caldwell seems to believe that maintaining a luxury lifestyle is a business necessity. the court-appointed financial analyst noted dryly in his report. However, the correlation between her spending and actual income generation is tenuous at best. The financial revelations extended beyond spending patterns to reveal Jessica's fundamental dishonesty with the court system. She'd signed declarations, under penalty of perjury, claiming financial hardship while simultaneously living a lifestyle that most families could only dream of. The legal implications were serious potential charges of contempt of court for providing false financial information, but the emotional implications were even more damaging. While claiming she couldn't afford therapy for Emma's anxiety or speech treatment for Jake's developmental needs, Jessica was spending thousands on personal luxuries. She was literally choosing her own comfort over her children's well-being then, lying about it in legal documents. The credit card statements, bank records, and social media posts created an irrefutable narrative of financial deception and misplaced priorities. They showed a woman who viewed child support as supplemental income for her lifestyle rather than money designated for children's care. They revealed someone willing to sacrifice her children's therapeutic needs to fund her personal desires. Most importantly, they demonstrated that Jessica's claims of financial instability were manufactured crises designed to extract more money from me while hiding her actual financial resources from the court. The final piece of the financial puzzle came from an unexpected source: Jessica's own tax returns, which she'd been forced to produce as part of the discovery process. The returns revealed additional income streams she'd failed to disclose, including rental income from a property her father had transferred to her, and investment dividends from a trust fund she'd inherited from her grandmother. When combined with her social media earnings, family support, and undisclosed income sources, Jessica's actual financial situation was dramatically different from what she'd represented to the court. She wasn't a struggling single mother barely making ends meet. She was a woman with access to substantial resources who chose to and self-spend them on herself rather than her children's needs. The impact on the custody case was immediate and devastating. Jessica's credibility was destroyed by her own financial records. If she was willing to lie about something as easily verified as her income and expenses, what else was she lying about? The court would now view all of her claims with skepticism, from her parenting abilities to her concerns about my fitness. As a father, my attorney summarized the financial evidence in stark terms. Mrs. Caldwell has demonstrated a pattern of deception regarding her financial circumstances, misappropriation of funds intended for the children's benefit, and prioritization of personal luxury over children's medical and therapeutic needs. These findings raise serious questions about her judgment and truthfulness. The credit card statements that had arrived in that thick manila folder became exhibits A through Z in the case for custody modification. They told a story that no amount of legal maneuvering could contradict: a mother who had lost sight of what really mattered, who measured her worth in likes and follows, while her children suffered from untreated anxiety and delayed development. The financial revelations didn't just expose Jessica's deception, they revealed the true cost of her social media obsession. Every dollar spent on staging and photography was a dollar not spent on therapy for Emma. Every luxury purchase was a choice to prioritize image over substance. Every undisclosed income source was evidence of her willingness to manipulate the legal system for personal gain. As I reviewed those damning financial records one final time before court, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication, because the truth was finally coming to light. Sadness, because it took a court-ordered investigation to reveal how little Jessica actually valued our children's well-being compared to her own comfort and status. The numbers didn't lie, even when Jessica did. And in family court, financial records carry the weight of objective truth in a system often clouded by competing narratives and emotional manipulation. Her own spending patterns had written the verdict on her priorities, and no amount of expensive legal representation could rewrite that mathematical truth. The hospital bracelet from Children's Medical Center still sits on my nightstand, a thin plastic band with Emma's name and patient number that represents the moment everything changed. March 15th, 2:47 a.m., the night my 7-year-old daughter's untreated anxiety escalated to a full medical emergency while her mother was nowhere to be found. The call came from Emma herself. Through tears and gasping breaths, she managed to tell me that her chest hurt and she couldn't breathe. Jake was crying in the background, and I could hear the chaos of a child's panic attack echoing through the phone. "Where's Mummy?" I asked, already grabbing my keys and heading for the door. "She went out with her friends," Emma sobbed. "The babysitter is sleeping and won't wake up." I broke every speed limit getting to Jessica's house, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, I found Emma hyperventilating on the living room floor, while Jake tried to comfort her with the ineffective but heartbreaking tenderness of a 5-year-old brother. The babysitter, a teenager I'd never met, was indeed asleep on the couch with headphones in, completely unaware of the crisis unfolding feet away. Emma's symptoms were severe rapid heartbeat, difficulty breathing, chest pain, and the kind of panic that can escalate to dangerous levels in children. I didn't hesitate. Scooping her into my arms while Jake climbed into the truck beside us, I drove straight to the emergency room. calling Jessica repeatedly on the way. Each call went to voicemail. The ER staff took Emma's condition seriously, immediately triaging her as a priority case. Dr. Williams, the attending physician, recognized the symptoms of a severe panic attack but wanted to rule out any cardiac issues. Given her age and the intensity of her distress, has she been under any unusual stress lately? Dr. Williams asked as nurses attached monitoring equipment to my daughter's small body. Where to begin? The custody battle, the constant performance pressure, the inconsistent medication compliance, the emotional neglect disguised as social media content creation. I gave him the abbreviated version while Emma gradually calmed down in my arms. She's been dealing with her parents' divorce and some anxiety issues, I explained. She's supposed to be on medication, but the compliance has been inconsistent. The medical team's concern was immediate and professional. They wanted to know why a child with diagnosed anxiety disorder wasn't receiving consistent treatment. They needed contact information for her prescribing physician. They required a full medical history that I could only partially provide because Jessica controlled most of Emma's healthcare decisions. I'm calling her mother now, I told them, dialing Jessica's number again. Still voicemail. What followed were 4 hours of medical evaluation and stabilization while I tried unsuccessfully to reach Jessica. Emma's panic attack had triggered a cascade of physical symptoms that required careful monitoring. Her heart rate was elevated, her breathing remained shallow, and she was experiencing the kind of chest pain that mimics cardiac issues in young children. Jake fell asleep in a chair beside Emma's bed, his small hand holding hers while IV fluids and mild sedation helped her body recover from the adrenaline surge. Watching my children comfort each other in a hospital room while their mother partied with friends was an image that will haunt me forever. Jessica finally returned my calls at 5:30 a.m. Her voice thick with sleep and what sounded like alcohol. "What's wrong?" she asked, as if middle-of-the-night calls about hospitalized children were routine occurrences. "Emma's in the emergency room," I said, my voice carefully controlled despite my rage. "She had a severe panic attack." "Where were you?" "I was out with friends. I told the babysitter to call if there were any problems." "The babysitter was unconscious. Emma called me herself." There was a long pause. "Is she okay?" "She's stabilized now. The doctors want to know why she hasn't been taking her medication consistently." Another pause. "I give it to her when she needs it." "That's not how anxiety medication works, Jessica. It needs to be taken daily, as prescribed." By the time Jessica arrived at the hospital, Emma was sleeping peacefully, and the medical team had completed their evaluation. Dr. Williams wanted to speak with both parents about Emma's ongoing care, and his questions revealed the extent of Jessica's medical negligence. "When was Emma's last dose of fluoxetine?" he asked. Jessica looked uncomfortable. "I'm not sure. A few days ago. The prescription should be taken daily. Inconsistent dosing can actually worsen anxiety symptoms and trigger rebound panic attacks." "She seemed fine without it," Jessica insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Dr. Williams pulled up Emma's medical records on his computer. "She's been prescribed this medication for 6 months. But the pharmacy records showed the prescription has only been filled 3 times. A month's supply should last. Obviously, a month. But there are gaps of 6 to 8 weeks between refills." The evidence was damning and undeniable. While I'd been documenting Emma's anxiety episodes and behavioral changes, Jessica had been neglecting her medical care. The panic attack that landed Emma in the emergency room was the predictable result of untreated anxiety disorder. "I want to be clear about this," Dr. Williams continued, his tone carrying the weight of medical authority. "Anxiety medication isn't optional for children with severe symptoms. Stopping and starting creates instability that can be dangerous. This kind of inconsistent treatment is considered medical neglect." Medical neglect. The words hung in the sterile hospital air, like an indictment. Jessica's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. But she couldn't argue with documented pharmacy records and her daughter's presence in the emergency room. Hospital social worker, Mrs. Patterson, arrived as part of standard protocol for pediatric emergency cases involving possible neglect. She interviewed both parents separately and reviewed the medical evidence that had brought Emma to this crisis. "I'm required to file a report with Child Protective Services," she explained. "Not because anyone believes there's intentional abuse, but because the medical evidence suggests a pattern of healthcare neglect that needs to be addressed." Another CPS report, but this one came from medical professionals who'd witnessed the consequences of Jessica's negligence firsthand. Unlike the anonymous complaints Jessica had filed against me, this investigation would focus on documented medical facts and pharmacy records that couldn't be disputed. Emma woke up confused and groggy, her small hand immediately reaching for mine. "Daddy, am I sick?" "You had a scary night, sweetheart, but you're going to be okay," I assured her. "The doctors are going to help us make sure this doesn't happen." Again, Jake stirred in his chair, immediately alert and checking on his sister. The bond between them, strengthened by their shared experience of emotional neglect, was evident in the way they instinctively protected and comforted each other. Dr. Williams discharged Emma with strict instructions about medication, compliance, and follow-up care. He also provided documentation that would become crucial evidence in our custody. Case medical records showing the direct connection between Jessica's negligence and Emma's emergency hospitalization. This child needs consistent medical care and emotional support, he wrote in his discharge summary. The pattern of inconsistent medication compliance has contributed to escalating anxiety symptoms, and tonight's emergency presentation. Continued medical neglect could result in more severe psychological and physical consequences. The drive home was quiet, both children exhausted from their traumatic night. But Emma's words as I tucked her into bed at my apartment revealed the psychological toll of living with Jessica's emotional unavailability. "I'm sorry I called you, Daddy," she whispered. "Don't ever be sorry for calling me when you need help," I said firmly. "That's what daddies are for." "Mommy says I'm being dramatic when I get scared." "You're not dramatic, sweetheart. Your feelings are real and important. And when you're scared or hurt, you should always tell a grown-up who can help you." The hospital bracelet became a symbol of everything wrong with our custody arrangement. While I was fighting for the right to be a full-time father, my children were suffering medical emergencies because their primary caregiver prioritized her social life over their healthcare needs. Jessica's absence during Emma's crisis wasn't an isolated incident. It was emblematic of her fundamental disengagement from her children's real needs. She could stage elaborate photo shoots showcasing her devotion, but when Emma needed her most, she was unreachable. Partying with friends while a stranger was supposed to monitor two young children with documented anxiety issues. The medical records from that night would play a crucial role in the custody modification hearing. They provided objective, professional documentation of the consequences of Jessica's neglect. Emergency room physicians, unlike family court mediators, deal in medical facts rather than competing narratives. But beyond its legal significance, the hospital bracelet represented something more personal. The moment I stopped apologizing for wanting to protect my children and started demanding the legal authority to do so effectively. Emma's panic attack in an empty house while her mother was unreachable wasn't just medical neglect, it was a preview of what could happen if the custody arrangement remained unchanged. The thin plastic band with its smudged ink and institutional adhesive became a talisman of parental responsibility and a reminder that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you need legal standing to protect the people you love most. The Guardian ad litem's report sits before Judge Patricia Morrison like a roadmap to the truth. 47 pages of careful documentation that would finally give voice to what Emma and Jake had been trying to tell us for months. Jennifer Walsh's thorough investigation had produced the kind of comprehensive assessment that family courts depend on when children's futures hang in the balance. Judge Morrison had a reputation for cutting through legal theatrics to focus on children's actual needs. 23 years on the family court bench had given her an almost supernatural ability to detect manipulation and performance. As she reviewed the evidence before calling our custody modification hearing to order, I felt cautiously optimistic that the truth would finally have its day. Jessica arrived at the courthouse like she was attending a charity gala, dressed in a conservative but expensive suit that projected maternal responsibility while maintaining her carefully cultivated image. Her legal team, Harold Steinberg and two associates, had prepared a presentation designed to portray her as the victim of a vindictive ex-husband trying to punish her for their failed marriage. My own representation was modest by comparison. Jim Morrison and I sat at the plaintiff's table with our boxers of documentation, knowing that our case would succeed or fail based on facts rather than presentation. We had medical records, school reports, financial evidence, and most importantly, the children's own voices speaking through Jennifer Walsh's professional assessment. "Your Honor," Steinberg began his opening statement with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to manipulating family court proceedings. "We're here today because Mr. Williams is attempting to weaponize the legal system against my client. His motion for custody modification is based on manufactured concerns and deliberate misrepresentation of Mrs. Caldwell's exemplary parenting." Exemplary parenting. The phrase would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. Steinberg painted a picture of Jessica as the devoted single mother working tirelessly to provide stability while I undermined her efforts out of spite and jealousy. "Mrs. Caldwell has created a loving, structured environment where these children thrive," he continued. "She's invested in their education, their enrichment activities, their social development. Meanwhile, Mr. Williams has systematically documented normal childhood behaviors and twisted them into evidence of neglect." Jim Morrison's opening was deliberately understated, focusing on facts rather than rhetoric. "Your Honor, this case isn't about parental conflict or post-divorce animosity. It's about two children whose emotional well-being has been documented by multiple professionals as being compromised by their current living arrangement." He outlined our evidence methodically: the medical records showing inconsistent anxiety treatment, the school reports documenting performance issues, the financial records revealing misplaced priorities, and most importantly, the Guardian ad litem's comprehensive assessment of the children's emotional states. The evidence will show that these children experience measurable stress and anxiety in their primary residence while demonstrating significant improvement in their secondary residence. This isn't about which parent deserves custody, it's about where these specific children can best develop and thrive. Jennifer Walsh was our first witness, and her testimony would set the tone for everything that followed. Under Jim's careful questioning, she walked through her investigation process and findings with the clinical precision that made her recommendations so powerful. I spent approximately 40 hours with these children in various settings over a 3-month period, she testified. The differences in their emotional presentation between environments was stark and consistent. She described Emma's hypervigilance at Jessica's house, the way she constantly monitored her mother's reactions and modified her behavior accordingly. She detailed Jake's emotional suppression and his learned reluctance to express authentic feelings or needs. Both children demonstrated what we call performance anxiety, a heightened awareness of being watched and judged that interfered with their ability to engage in age-appropriate activities, Jennifer explained. This was in their father's care, both children displayed normal emotional regulation and developmental progress. Steinberg's cross-examination was aggressive, attempting to portray Jennifer as biased toward fathers or influenced by my coaching of the children, but Jennifer's experience with hostile attorneys was extensive, and her responses remained professional and fact-based. Mr. Steinberg, my recommendations are based on direct observation of the children's behavior and emotional states, not on either parent's claims or preferences. The children's own words and actions spoke more clearly than any adult testimony. When Jennifer quoted Emma's statement about feeling like two different kids, and Jake's description of being like a statue at his mother's house, the courtroom fell silent. The raw honesty of children's perspectives cut through legal posturing like a knife. Dr. Patricia Chen followed Jennifer's testimony, providing the clinical context for the children's behavioral patterns. Her expertise in childhood anxiety and trauma gave weight to observations that might otherwise be dismissed as normal adjustment issues. Emma's anxiety disorder has been consistently underrated, leading to the escalation that resulted in her emergency hospitalization. Dr. Chen testified, this pattern of medical neglect has created additional trauma beyond the original anxiety symptoms. She explained how children internalized their parents' emotional availability, how Emma had learned to suppress her needs to avoid disappointing her mother, how Jake had developed learned helplessness around expressing his authentic emotions. The improvement in both children's emotional regulation during extended time with their father suggests that their symptoms are largely environmental rather than purely chemical or genetic. Dr. Chen concluded, with consistent emotional support and medical compliance, both children can recover from this trauma. Steinberg's attempts to discredit Dr. Chen focused on her relatively recent involvement with the family, but her clinical expertise and objective documentation made his attacks seem petty rather than substantive. The school testimony was particularly damaging to Jessica's case. Mrs. Rodriguez and Mrs. Patterson described the behavioral changes they'd witnessed over the academic year, the correlation between the children's emotional states and their home environments, the concerning perfectionism that interfered with normal learning processes. Emma's academic performance improved dramatically during periods when she seemed emotionally secure. Mrs. Rodriguez testified, when she was anxious and withdrawn, her work suffered despite her obvious intelligence. Mrs. Patterson's description of Jake's emotional suppression was equally compelling. A 5-year-old who is afraid to finger paint because he might do it wrong as a child under tremendous psychological pressure. That level of perfectionism isn't developmentally appropriate. The medical testimony was devastating. Dr. Williams from the emergency room described Emma's condition during her panic attack and the clear evidence of medical neglect that had contributed to the crisis. The pharmacy records showing inconsistent medication compliance provided objective documentation that couldn't be disputed. Anxiety medication requires consistent daily dosing to be effective, Dr. Williams explained. The pattern shown in these records, weeks without medication, followed by sporadic dosing, can actually worsen symptoms and trigger rebound anxiety. When it came time for Jessica to testify in her own defense, her polished presentation couldn't overcome the weight of documented evidence. Steinberg had coached her well, but the facts were stubborn things that resisted manipulation. I love my children more than life itself, Jessica testified, her voice carrying practiced emotion. Everything I do is for them. Mr. Williams is trying to punish me for ending our marriage by taking away the most precious thing in my life. But Jim Morrison's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. He walked through the financial records showing luxury spending while claiming poverty. He questioned the inconsistent medical care and Jessica's priorities during Emma's hospitalization. He presented screenshots of social media posts that contradicted her sworn testimony about her lifestyle and resources. Mrs. Caldwell, you testified that you can barely afford basic necessities for the children. Can you explain this $3,200 charge for photography services during the same month? You claimed you couldn't afford Emma's medication copay. Jessica's explanations became increasingly defensive and contradictory. She claimed that photography was a business expense, then insisted her social media work was just a hobby. She said the children's medication wasn't essential, then claimed she'd been following medical advice to reduce the dosage. You were unreachable for over 4 hours while your daughter was having a medical emergency. Where exactly were you? I was having dinner with friends. The babysitter was supposed to handle any problems. The babysitter was unconscious from alcohol or drug use. Your 7-year-old daughter had to call her father herself while experiencing a panic attack. Does that seem like responsible parenting? To you, Jessica's composure cracked under the pressure of confronting her own documented failures. Her testimony revealed someone who genuinely believed her own narrative of victimhood, unable to accept responsibility for the consequences of her choices. The financial expert's testimony about Jessica's undisclosed income and family support was the final nail in her credibility coffin. The systematic deception about her resources, combined with the misuse of child support funds, painted a picture of someone willing to lie under oath to maintain an advantage. As the day's testimony concluded, Judge Morrison's expression suggested she'd heard enough to make her decision. The evidence against Jessica wasn't just compelling, it was overwhelming and objective, documented by medical professionals, educators, and child welfare experts who had no agenda beyond the children's well-being. The truth had finally been told, in full, supported by evidence that couldn't be manipulated or reinterpreted. Jennifer Walsh's report had given Emma and Jake a voice in their own custody case, and what they'd been trying to tell us all along was now part of the official court record. Tomorrow would bring final arguments and Judge Morrison's decision, but the truth had already been established. The only question remaining was whether the legal system would have the courage to act. On what the evidence so clearly demonstrated, the family photo on Jessica's nightstand hasn't been moved in 3 years, a 5x7 reminder of happier times when Emma was 4 and Jake was barely walking. In the picture, we're all laughing at something outside, the frame genuine joy, captured in an unguarded moment before social media metrics became more important than actual memories. Tonight, as Jessica sits alone in her perfectly appointed bedroom, that photograph mocks her with its authenticity. No ring lights illuminated that moment. No photographer directed our poses. No caption was crafted to maximize engagement. It was just a family being happy together, the kind of organic contentment that seems impossible to recreate now. The custody hearing had ended 6 hours ago, but Jessica hasn't moved from this spot beside her bed, still wearing the conservative suit she'd chosen to project maternal responsibility. Judge Morrison's words echo in her mind like a verdict she's not ready to accept. The evidence presented raises serious concerns about the current custody arrangement and its impact on these children's emotional well-being. Her phone buzzes constantly, with notifications, followers commenting on her latest post about fighting for her babies, brands reaching out about partnership opportunities, friends offering support for her difficult journey. But for the first time in years, Jessica ignores the digital demands that have consumed her life. The screen remains dark, the notifications unanswered. The Guardian ad litem's report sits on her dresser. 47 pages of professional observations that paint a devastating portrait of her parenting. Jennifer Walsh's careful documentation of the children's anxiety, their performance-based behavior, their fear of making mistakes, all of it reads like an indictment of everything Jessica thought she was doing right. Both children demonstrate signs of chronic stress that appear to be environment-specific. She reads again, the clinical language somehow more damaging than any personal attack could be. Environment-specific. The stress her children feel is caused by her environment, her choices, her priorities. The financial records spread across her bed tell another story Jessica is finally ready to confront. 3 years of credit card statements showing $45,000 in personal expenses while claiming poverty. Pharmacy records proving her neglect of Emma's medical needs. Bank deposits from her father that she'd hidden from the court. The numbers don't lie, even when she had. Margaret Caldwell's reaction to the hearing had been swift and brutal. "You've embarrassed this family," her mother had said over the phone an hour ago. "All that money spent on lawyers, all those connections your father cultivated, and you've managed to lose custody because you couldn't put your phone down long enough to be a proper mother." Proper mother. The phrase cuts deeper than intended, because Jessica knows it's true. She'd been so focused on appearing to be the perfect mother that she'd forgotten how to actually be one. The irony is devastating. While building an online brand around maternal devotion, she'd systematically neglected her children's real emotional needs. The social media empire that had consumed her life now feels like a house of cards built on lies. 30,000 followers who believe they know her story, sponsors who pay her to portray a life that exists only in carefully curated posts, a digital persona that bears no resemblance to the reality her children experience daily. Opens her laptop and scrolls through recent posts, seeing them now through the lens of the day's testimony. The photo of Emma spontaneously painting staged after Marcus had already helped her create the original artwork. The video of Jake's adorable breakfast conversation edited and reshot until his natural speech patterns were replaced by performance anxiety. Every post a lie, every caption a betrayal of her children's authentic experiences. The comments section, once a source of validation and income, now reads like a chorus of enablers. "You're such an inspiration. Your kids are so lucky. What a devoted mom." The praise feels hollow now. purchased with her children's emotional security and her own integrity. Robert Caldwell's disappointment had been equally harsh, but more focused on consequences than emotions. The legal fees alone are approaching 6 figures, he'd said. And for what? So you could lose custody anyway. Maybe it's time to accept that your little social media hobby has cost more than it's earned. Hobby, her father's dismissive term for the business she'd built, the identity she'd created, the validation she'd craved. But sitting here surrounded by evidence of her failures, Jessica wonders if he's right. What had started as creative expression had become an addiction to approval, a desperate need for external validation that left no room for genuine connection with her own children. Emma's medical records are the hardest documents to review, page after page of missed appointments, inconsistent medication compliance, and escalating anxiety symptoms that she'd ignored or minimized. The emergency room report from 3 weeks ago was clinical in its condemnation. Medical neglect contributed to this crisis presentation. Medical neglect. She'd let her 7-year-old daughter suffer panic attacks because consistent medication interfered with her ability to look normal in photos. She'd prioritized aesthetic concerns over medical necessity, choosing her brand image over her child's mental health. The realization hits her like physical pain. Jake's psychological assessments are equally damning. His emotional suppression, his fear of making mistakes, his learned helplessness around expressing authentic feelings, all documented by professionals who had no agenda beyond his well-being. The 5-year-old who used to laugh at everything had learned to monitor his behavior constantly, performing happiness instead of feeling it. The school reports confirm what the medical records suggest. Both children were suffering under the pressure of her expectations. Emma's academic performance correlated directly with her anxiety levels. Jake's speech impediment worsened during periods of high stress. Their teachers had been documenting concerning behavioral changes for months while Jessica was too busy staging photo shoots to notice. Mrs. Rodriguez's testimony keeps replaying in her mind. Emma seems to carry a tremendous burden of worry. She's constantly asking if her work is good enough, if she's disappointing anyone. It's heartbreaking to see in such a young child. Heartbreaking that's what Jessica had done to her own daughter, broken her heart with impossible expectations and conditional love. Emma's anxiety wasn't a medical condition to be managed. It was a symptom of emotional neglect disguised as high standards. The custody exchange photos on her phone tell a story she'd refused to see. Emma's forced smiles, Jake's careful posture, both children performing for the camera instead of connecting with their mother. Even during supposedly intimate family moments, Jessica had been directing rather than participating, staging memories instead of creating them. Marcus's documentation suddenly makes sense in a way that's painful to acknowledge. His careful notes about the children's behavior weren't attempts to build a legal case. They were the observations of a parent who actually paid attention to his children's emotional needs. While she was crafting captions about their happiness, he was noticing their anxiety. While she was staging photo opportunities, he was creating genuine security. The contrast in their parenting approaches is stark when viewed honestly. Marcus provided structure without performance pressure, love without conditions, acceptance without expectations of perfection. His modest apartment had become their emotional sanctuary, while her beautiful house had become a stage where they performed childhood instead of living it. The financial implications are staggering, but not in the way her parents are calculating. Yes, the legal fees and lost income matter, but the real cost is measured in her children's emotional well-being. She'd traded their mental health for social media success, their authentic childhood for content creation opportunities. The brand partnerships that once felt like validation now seem like deals with the devil. She'd sold her children's privacy and emotional security for sponsored content opportunities. Every dollar earned through their exploitation was a dollar that should have gone toward their therapy, their medical care, their actual needs. Her followers don't know about Emma's panic attacks or Jake's regression. They see only the polished version of motherhood that Jessica has presented, the fantasy life that exists in carefully edited posts. The disconnect between her online persona and her actual parenting has become a chasm too wide to bridge. The photo on her nightstand seems to mock her from its silver frame. That happy family no longer exists, destroyed not by divorce or external circumstances, but by her own choices. She'd had everything: loving children, financial security, genuine happiness, and she'd traded it all for likes, follows, and the hollow validation of strangers on the internet. For the first time in years, Jessica turns her phone face down and leaves it there. The notifications will wait. The comments will accumulate without responses. The carefully maintained digital persona will have to survive without constant attention. Tonight, she needs to figure out how to become the mother her children deserve, rather than the one her followers expect. The family photo sits silent on the nightstand, a reminder of what authentic happiness looks like, and a challenge to find her way back to the woman who could create such moments. The question now is whether there's still time to rebuild what she's broken, or if the damage to her children's trust and emotional security is too severe to repair. The realization that she's been living a lie is devastating, but it's also the first step toward potential redemption. Jessica closes the laptop, gathers the scattered legal documents, and makes a decision that will require more courage than any social media post ever did. The decision to stop performing motherhood and start actually practicing it. The new custody order sits framed on my kitchen wall beside Emma's latest honor roll certificate. A legal document that changed everything with the stroke of Judge Morrison's pen. Joint legal custody with primary physical custody awarded to petitioner Marcus Williams, with extensive parenting time for respondent Jessica Caldwell, subject to completion of parenting, education, and therapy requirements. Judge Morrison's reasoning was clear and comprehensive. Addressing every aspect of the evidence presented during our 3-day hearing, her decision wasn't just about changing a custody schedule, it was about recognizing that children's emotional well-being must take precedence over parental convenience or social expectations. The court finds that both children would benefit from increased stability and reduced performance pressure. Judge Morrison had stated from the bench, her words carrying the weight of legal authority and human compassion. While the court acknowledges that Mrs. Caldwell loves her children, the evidence demonstrates that her parenting approach has created an environment that compromises their emotional development. The judge's analysis of the financial evidence had been particularly damning. Mrs. Caldwell's pattern of financial deception, combined with the misappropriation of funds intended for the children's medical care, raises serious concerns about her judgment and priorities. Mr. Williams has demonstrated consistent prioritization of the children's actual needs over personal interests. Jessica's reaction to the verdict was a mixture of shock, anger, and what might have been relief. Her carefully constructed facade finally cracked in that courtroom, revealing someone who was perhaps as trapped by her own image as the children had been. Steinberg's immediate filing of an appeal notice was expected, but Judge Morrison's detailed findings would be difficult to overturn. The transition period was awkward but necessary. Emma and Jake would gradually shift to living primarily with me, with Jessica having them every other weekend and Wednesday evenings, essentially reversing our previous arrangement. But the judge had required Jessica to complete parenting education classes and engage in therapy before the new schedule took full effect. This isn't about punishment, Judge Morrison had explained. It's about ensuring that both parents can provide the emotional support these children need. Mrs. Caldwell's willingness to engage in self-reflection and skill building will determine the timeline for implementing the new arrangement. The children's reactions were telling. Emma's relief was palpable. The constant anxiety about disappointing her mother could finally begin to heal. Jake's excitement about having his own room at my apartment, about being able to be loud every day, broke my heart and filled it simultaneously. Does this mean we don't have to do picture time anymore? Emma asked during our first dinner after the verdict. Not unless you want to, I assured her. And if you do want to take pictures, it'll be because you're having fun, not because anyone else needs them for anything. Jake's response was even simpler. Can we paint my room blue? Like the sky? Any color you want, buddy. It's your room. The practical changes were immediate and profound. Both children's medical care became consistent. Emma's anxiety medication was properly managed. Jake's speech therapy resumed, and regular checkups with Dr. Chen provided ongoing emotional support. Their academic performance improved within weeks, as the pressure to be perfect was replaced with encouragement to explore and learn. Jessica's compliance with the court's requirements was reluctant at first, but gradually became more genuine. The parenting education classes forced her to confront the impact of her social media obsession on the children's development. Dr. Patricia Chen, now serving as Jessica's individual therapist, helped her understand how her need for external validation had compromised her ability to provide unconditional love and acceptance. Recovery from this kind of performance-based parenting takes time, Dr. Chen explained during one of our coordination meetings. Jessica is beginning to understand that her children's love shouldn't be conditional on their ability to maintain her image. The most significant change was Jessica's gradual withdrawal from social media. The constant documentation of the children's lives stopped abruptly after the custody decision. Her Instagram posts became sporadic and eventually ceased altogether as she began focusing on actual parenting rather than performing it. I'm taking a break from sharing our personal life online, Jessica announced to her followers in what would be her final post. My children deserve privacy and authentic childhood experiences. Thank you for your support, but my family needs to heal away from the public eye. The response from her followers was mixed, some supportive, others angry about losing their window into her curated life. But Jessica was learning to value her children's emotional well-being over strangers' opinions. A fundamental shift that made co-parenting possible for the first time since our divorce. Our first family therapy session together was tense but productive. Dr. Chen facilitated conversations that had been impossible during the custody battle, helping us focus on the children's needs rather than our own grievances. Jessica's apologies to Emma and Jake were genuine, acknowledging the pressure she'd placed on them and committing to change. I'm sorry I made you worry about being perfect all the time, she told Emma during one session. You're already perfect, exactly as you are, and I should have told you that every day. Emma's response was characteristic of her generous heart. It's okay, Mommy. Daddy says everyone makes mistakes and that's how we learn. The healing process wasn't linear or simple. Emma's anxiety didn't disappear overnight, and Jake's emotional openness returned gradually. But with consistent medication, therapy, and an environment where their authentic selves were celebrated rather than critiqued, both children began to flourish in ways that amazed their teachers and therapists. Emma's creativity has exploded, Mrs. Rodriguez reported during our first parent conference under the new arrangement. She's taking risks in her artwork and writing that she never attempted before. It's like watching a flower bloom. Jake's transformation was equally dramatic. His stutter virtually disappeared, his academic performance improved, and his natural humor and enthusiasm returned. The fearful, hypervigilant child who'd been afraid to finger paint became an exuberant kindergartner who approached new experiences with excitement rather than anxiety. The financial stress that had plagued our relationship also improved significantly. With primary custody, I qualified for child support from Jessica, money that went directly toward the children's needs rather than luxury lifestyle maintenance. Her reduced expenses, combined with the end of expensive legal battles, created stability for everyone involved. Jessica's relationship with her parents became strained as they struggled to accept her new priorities. Robert and Margaret Caldwell had invested heavily in their daughter's social media success and weren't pleased to see her abandon what they viewed as a profitable enterprise. But Jessica was learning to value her children's approval over her parents' expectations. They're disappointed that I'm not the daughter they wanted, Jessica admitted during one of our co-parenting meetings, but I was so busy trying to be the person they expected that I forgot how to be the mother my children needed. The custody order's requirement for Jessica to maintain consistent therapy proved beneficial beyond the court's intentions. Through her work with Dr. Chen, she began addressing the deeper issues that had driven her need for validation: childhood perfectionism, anxiety about worthiness, and the belief that love was conditional on performance. 6 months after the custody modification, our co-parenting relationship had evolved into something resembling partnership. We could discuss the children's needs without litigation threats, coordinate their care without court intervention, and even attend school events together without drama. The children benefited from this stability, feeling secure that their parents could work together for their well-being. It's weird how normal everything feels now, Emma observed during one of our weekend transitions. Like you and Mommy don't make scary faces at each other anymore. The custody order itself became more than just a legal document. It represented the moment when Emma and Jake's voices were finally heard and their needs prioritized. The extensive documentation process that had led to this outcome also created a roadmap for healthy co-parenting going forward. Judge Morrison's wisdom in requiring therapy and parenting education rather than simply punishing Jessica had created the possibility for genuine healing. The custody modification wasn't about winners and losers, it was about creating an environment where two traumatized children could recover and thrive. As I looked at that framed document on my kitchen wall, I felt not triumph, but gratitude. Gratitude that the legal system had worked as intended, that professionals had advocated for my children when they couldn't advocate for themselves, and that Jessica had found the courage to change, rather than simply appealing the decision. The new beginning wasn't just about custody schedules or living arrangements, it was about a family learning to prioritize authentic love over performed perfection, emotional security over social media success, and children's needs over adult egos. The custody order made it official, but the real transformation happened in the hearts and minds of 4 people learning how to be a family again, even if that family looked different than it had before. Emma's honor roll certificate, hanging beside the custody order, represented the academic success that followed emotional healing. Jake's latest drawing, taped to the refrigerator, showed a house with multiple rooms where stick figures moved freely between spaces, no longer confined to separate, isolated boxes. The legal document had made their safety official, but their recovery was ongoing, supported by love, consistency, and the radical idea that children should be valued for who they are, rather than how they perform. The custody order was just the beginning of their new story, one where Emma and Jake could finally be kids again. Emma's honor roll certificate hangs in our kitchen now, not as a trophy or social media content, but as a quiet celebration of what happens when children feel safe enough to let their true abilities shine. 8 months after the custody modification, both my children have transformed in ways that still surprise their teachers, their therapists, and sometimes even me. The certificate represents more than academic achievement. It symbolizes Emma's recovery from the performance anxiety that had crippled her for so long. The same child who once erased correct answers because they weren't pretty enough now approaches learning with curiosity and confidence. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called it the most dramatic positive change I've seen in 20 years of education. Jake's transformation has been equally remarkable. The 5-year-old who was afraid to finger paint because he might do it wrong is now the class artist, creating elaborate masterpieces that his teacher displays with pride. His stutter has virtually disappeared, replaced by the animated storytelling that marks him as his mother's son and his father's pride. They're completely different children, Dr. Chen observed during our most recent family session. Emma has developed genuine self-confidence, and Jake has found his voice. The anxiety and emotional suppression that brought them to my office have been replaced by age-appropriate resilience and emotional intelligence. The credit for their recovery belongs to many people, but mostly to Emma and Jake themselves. Children are remarkably resilient when given the right environment to heal. Consistent medication management, regular therapy, and most importantly, unconditional love and acceptance created the foundation for their emotional growth. Jessica's journey has been perhaps the most surprising aspect of our post-custody life. The woman who had fought so desperately to maintain control has evolved into someone I barely recognize in the best possible way. Her court-mandated therapy with Dr. Chen has helped her understand the roots of her need for external validation and develop healthier ways of relating to the children. I spent so many years trying to be the perfect mother that I forgot how to just be their mom, Jessica reflected during one of our co-parenting meetings. I was so focused on documenting their childhood that I was missing out on actually experiencing it with them. The change in Jessica's approach to parenting is dramatic and genuine. Her visits with Emma and Jake now focus on connection rather than content creation. They bake cookies and actually eat them, even when they're lopsided and imperfect. They play games where someone has to lose without it being a catastrophe. They have conversations about feelings and fears without worrying about maintaining an image. Jessica's withdrawal from social media wasn't easy. She had built her identity around her online presence and the validation it provided. But as her relationship with the children improved, her need for external approval diminished. She still takes photos occasionally, but they're personal memories rather than public performances. I had 30,000 followers who thought they knew me, Jessica told me recently, but I'd lost the two people whose opinion should have mattered most. No amount of likes could fill that void. The financial stability that came with the custody modification eliminated one major source of stress for our family. Jessica's child support, combined with reduced legal expenses and her decreased lifestyle costs, allowed all of us to focus on rebuilding rather than surviving. The children's medical and therapeutic needs could be met consistently without financial strain affecting their care. Our co-parenting relationship has evolved into something I never thought possible during the darkest days of our custody battle. We attend school events together without drama, coordinate medical appointments without conflict, and even share genuinely friendly conversations about the children's development. The animosity that characterized our divorce has been replaced by mutual respect for each other's roles in Emma and Jake's lives. It's weird seeing mommy and daddy be friends, Emma observed recently, but it makes my tummy feel better. That simple statement captures everything our family therapy sessions have been working toward. Children shouldn't have to carry the stress of their parents' conflicts. Emma's tummy troubles, which we now understand were anxiety symptoms, have resolved as the tension in her family environment decreased. The children's academic and social development has flourished in ways that validate every difficult decision we made during the custody process. Emma has made genuine friends at school, participating in activities without worrying about performing perfectly. Jake has joined the school's art club, where his creativity is celebrated rather than critiqued. Their emotional intelligence has grown remarkably as well. Both children can now identify and express their feelings in age-appropriate ways. They've learned that adults can disagree without it meaning someone is in danger. They understand that love isn't conditional on perfect behavior. You know what I like best about living here? Emma asked me last week as we worked on a jigsaw puzzle together. What's that, sweetheart? I can be bad at stuff and you still love me. That conversation crystallized everything we'd worked toward. Emma's understanding that love survives imperfection, that she doesn't have to earn affection through performance, represents the healing of wounds I didn't even realize she was carrying. Jake's growth has been equally profound. The child who once hoarded snacks in his backpack now confidently asks for what he needs. He expresses frustration without fear of punishment, seeks comfort when he's hurt, and shows affection without calculation. His emotional authenticity has returned in ways that make my heart ache for the months when it was missing. The support network that emerged during our custody battle has become a genuine community of care for our family. Dr. Chen continues to provide therapeutic support, but our sessions now focus on normal developmental challenges rather than crisis intervention. Mrs. Rodriguez and Mrs. Patterson remain advocates for the children's educational needs, but their concerns are typical teacher observations rather than behavioral red flags. Even some of Jessica's former friends have reached out to express their relief at seeing the children's improvement. Several people who had been uncomfortable with the family's social media exposure but felt unable to speak up now offer genuine support for Jessica's new approach to parenting. I'm proud of you for choosing your kids over your image, Maria Santos told Jessica during a recent chance encounter. It took courage to walk away from something that seemed so successful. The children's relationship with their extended family has also improved as Jessica's parents have learned to accept the new normal. Robert and Margaret Caldwell initially resented the loss of their social media showcase, but Emma and Jake's Obvious happiness and improved behavior have gradually won them over. They seem more relaxed, Margaret admitted during a recent family dinner, less worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. That observation from someone who had previously prioritized appearances over emotional well-being represents significant growth for the entire family system. Even Jessica's parents are learning that authentic happiness is more valuable than performed perfection. The anniversary of Emma's emergency room visit passed recently, marked not with trauma but with celebration of how far we've all come. Emma's anxiety is managed through consistent medication and therapy. But more importantly, she's learned coping skills and developed resilience that will serve her throughout her life. Jake's speech development has progressed beyond where it should have been without the trauma he experienced. His kindergarten teacher predicts he'll be reading above grade level by the end of the school year, a testament to what children can achieve when they feel emotionally secure. Looking toward the future, I feel cautiously optimistic about our family's trajectory. The children will face normal developmental challenges as they grow, but they now have the tools and support systems to handle those challenges healthily. Their relationship with both parents has been strengthened by the crisis we survived together. Jessica and I will never be the family we once were, but we've become something potentially better co-parents who prioritize our children's well-being over our own egos, adults who can work together despite our personal history, people who learn from our mistakes rather than being defined by them. The honor roll certificate on my kitchen wall represents just one moment in Emma's recovery, but it symbolizes so much more. It shows what's possible when children feel safe to take risks, make mistakes, and try again. It demonstrates the academic success that follows emotional healing. Most importantly, it proves that love, consistency, and authentic acceptance can overcome even the most damaging early experiences. As I watch Emma help Jake with his homework at our kitchen table, both children comfortable and confident in their own abilities, I'm reminded that the best custody outcomes aren't about winning or losing. They're about creating environments where children can heal, grow, and become the people they're meant to be. The certificate will fade and eventually be replaced by other achievements, but the confidence and resilience my children have developed will last a lifetime. That's the real victory, not the legal outcome, but the emotional healing that made genuine family life possible again. Emma and Jake called me selfish for fighting for them, but they understand now that sometimes love requires difficult decisions, that protecting children might mean challenging systems that aren't working for them, and that the best parents are willing to sacrifice their own comfort for their children's well-being. The honor roll certificate hangs beside finger paintings and crayon drawings, achievements both academic and artistic celebrated equally in our home. This kitchen wall tells the story of our recovery, not perfect, not without scars, but authentic and hopeful, and full of the kind of love that doesn't require documentation to be real. Our story continues to unfold, day by ordinary day, in the small moments that matter more than any social media post ever could. Emma's laughter when she beats me at checkers, Jake's excitement about his latest art project, bedtime stories read without cameras rolling, family dinners eaten without staging. These are the moments that define us now. The woman who once called me selfish for wanting to protect my children now understands that sometimes selfishness is just love wearing a different name, and the children who once performed happiness for strangers online now experience genuine joy in the privacy of their own home, where being imperfect is not only acceptable, but celebrated. That's not selfish at all. That's just being a family.